Hello everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Lorebeards. Hopefully everyone can hear us okay. If you're in the audience, please do let us know if audio levels are good and all that jazz while we kind of have this segment where we're just chatting for a bit. For anyone that is maybe new or does not know, I am Loremaster of Sotek. I am someone that comes to from a heavy background in Warhammer Fantasy lore, particularly the later editions, from like 6th edition to 8th edition and the end times and such. I am joined by my co-host here, Nathan, or also known as Great Book of Grudges.
Yep. Yeah, my name is Nathan from the Great Book of Grudges. My background is mostly competitive tabletop play for Warhammer Fantasy, going back from 5th edition up to 8 and 8.5, still carrying the flame for that. I love my lore too, but the true expert here is Loremaster of Sotek.
Well, and we do have some interesting other things that maybe we'll explore one day in the future about kind of some really interesting perspectives we have on the hobby. But we do have quite a few subjects lined up for today that we're going to get into here in just a little bit. But real quick, it just kind of occurred to me. But Nathan, when you were playing competitive, because we were both pretty heavy into competitive play, what was your main?
My main army during 8th edition at that point was mostly Skaven and a Tzeentchian Chaos Warrior build, because obviously that really tasty free up board save was just something
I hate
special.
both of those answers. um, Awesome. So, for those of you watching, thanks for coming in earlier. We'll kind of stumble around for a minute to give people just a minute to remember this thing exists and to hop in. One of these days we'll get like an intro or something. I've got things in the works to give us a little bit more fanciness. But any exciting particular news? What have you been up to this week?
So
Whether hobby wise or just stuff you're dealing with or what have you.
Well, I've been sorting out this for
What what is that?
That's a lot of square bases, because I am actually trying really hard this year to take part in Armies on Parade with a Slaanesh old hammer build. So going back from 3rd edition minis with a really nice conversion, and just trying to mix in the new Hedonites too, because I had this really cool idea with a Chaos War Shrine, but with I keep forgetting his name, but you know the big dude in the shrine. I keep forgetting what his name was, but he came out for Age of Sigmar. Glutos?
Oh, Glutos Arskillion. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm putting him on a Chaos War Shrine, the old school one, and I'm using his two big creatures as chariots too, because they just look kind of fun.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I mean, they'd fit like Gorbeast or something brilliantly.
Exactly. And it's just like I wanted something really visual. So it's just a little bit of fun with that. What about you? What have you been up to this week?
Okay, so one thing I have to draw attention to because it's cracking me up is that I was looking at those boxes on the ground in the background, and I like that despite being a world away, we have the same boxes. But I magnetized the bottom of this, so that's like a sheet of magnets. And what I've been doing is magnetizing my Nighthaunts so that when they transport, they don't fly around.
Smart idea.
So a few days ago, I started painting some new Nighthaunts. So I'm trying out some different ways to achieve a color scheme, but all of them have magnets on the bottom of the bases, so that they're not very strong magnets. Like, they're strong enough that I could put them in that and like kind of shake it and they don't move. But if I were to like throw it at the wall, they would go flying everywhere. You know, that way it's not like a hindrance how much of a magnet strength they have on them, but it also helps weigh them down a bit because Nighthaunt minis are they're so light. This makes them a little more sturdy, a little less prone to falling over. But I've been doing some good hobbyist stuff, built a few new minis. I made a new Lady Allender because the one that I had was all busted and I was tired of it, so I just bought a new one. But yeah, have you been up to any hobbyist stuff? Have you started any like painting or anything for your armies on parade?
Not so much. I've been building. I've got a lot of the minis just there. It's just I've been bringing in stuff. Like I finally started moving in the Tomb Kings into the room, and I've got to start doing it with the rest of the armies. But I've been building up with the board, which is currently drying outside because I used a lot of milliput to make it like like bricks on the floor and stuff like that. Because I'm trying a design. I'm not sure if I'm even going to be able to do this on time, but it took a lot of time. I think it was like 4 different packs of milliput in total with a roller from Green Stuff World, which is fantastic, But it's just been non-stop with just getting like plans done, cutting up models. I've got my old Chaos Warriors up currently sitting on Dettol to strip them down too. So like there's going to be a lot of work for this project.
Gotcha. Awesome. Well, I look forward to when you get some good progress on it. We'll have to put some pictures up so people can see. Though I'm sure they'll be
Yeah.
on your Twitter. Um, which reminds me, just real quick, for anyone curious or anyone listening to this afterwards, we have started uploading this in a podcast format. If you would prefer to just listen to it and not have to deal with looking at our faces for getting your Warhammer stuff. So I am doing my best to expand that onto some more platforms as well. We should be going on to Apple here sometime before the start of next week, because we've had some requests there. So just keep your eyes out for that on places where you can pick that up. But without further ado, I think we are ready to get started on today's first topic. Nathan, why don't you take us into it? Because this is kind of closer to your heart than mine, I think.
Get the thing on. It's the Slaanesh one, isn't it?
Yes, we are talking about Slaanesh this week. All things Slaanesh, and in particular the history of Slaanesh in the hobby.
Yeah, so like Slaanesh has we're going to be covering quite a bit because obviously there's been loads of radical changes. We're obviously not going to talk about the extreme stuff because you know, but
Oh
Slaanesh
yeah,
is obviously
only through a heavy layer of insinuation, so we don't get
yeah,
demonetized.
exactly. But Slaanesh to me is my favorite Chaos God. There have been loads of different gods introduced into the Warhammer Fantasy universe, including loads of different Chaos gods, not just the main 4, which everyone knows, but Slaanesh to me is the one that always spoke out to me the most, the pretty color schemes and so on. We've always had a cool representation, more so in the Warhammer Fantasy roleplay setting, I'd say, because obviously she had her own dedicated book, but didn't all the Chaos Gods have their own books too? Yeah.
Yeah, so let's start at the beginning, right?
All right.
If we kind of go back to the 80s or early 90s at least, starting like in third edition at least when Warhammer really became Warhammer. Before then it was really just kind of like a glorified role-playing game. But third edition is where it became more of like a tactical game, and we start to see recognizable elements to
Mm.
today's stuff. So Slaanesh, for those unaware, Slaanesh is the nowadays is known formally as the god of excess. But back in the day, particularly around the 80s and the 90s, Slaanesh was more like the god of sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Would probably be the best way to describe it. And Slaanesh was very edgy. A lot of Warhammer was very edgy back then. There was a lot of Slaanesh minis were kind of infamous for being a little gratuitous as far as having just as many boobs as you could fit onto a metal mini, particularly with the giant snake monsters and stuff. To the point where I especially like even some of the old artwork was very edgy, and borderline inappropriate for younger audiences. Um, but it was unfortunate because Slaanesh was almost kind of a very narrow-minded design back then. I
Yeah.
was recently watching a video from Overly Sarcastic Productions. I don't know if you're aware of them, where they talked about queer-coded villains as something in like the early film industry for America, where there's a lot of things in the West where like it wasn't really socially acceptable to talk about like a lot of those kinds of things, and so they ended up being villains. And Slaanesh is almost kind of like the perfect representation of that. You know, where if you go back far enough, Slaanesh was like this weird system where all the order or good guy races were, a lot of them were very pure and noble, and then Slaanesh was like everything that didn't fit into that neat little box.
Yeah.
Which I think drew a lot of people to Slaanesh, and that Slaanesh had a lot more expressionism associated with it, compared to a lot of the other gods. But as we got into later editions, tell me about what was your experience with Slaanesh when you joined the hobby, like around 5th and 6th edition.
So at that point, we obviously had a bit more of a fleshing out for Slaanesh. I mean, that's when we started getting characters like Sigvald introduced and so on, and Strika. I always keep mispronouncing his name. Azazel. We started seeing a driven god with goals rather than just, like you said, sex, drugs, and rock and roll, where it was Slaanesh was more introduced to be very influential and having a lot of cults hidden around the empire and so on. It's very much people could rival it in the sense of a different version of like the Purple Hand, which was obviously Zinch, and that's kind of what like drew me a little bit into it. It's like it's a cult, but they're not really hiding it too well because it's kind of like, oh look, it's sex cult, and everyone seems to think it's just like a weird sex cult rather than, oh, you're secretly worshipping chaos. Whereas the influence would breed in through there. It was always really like it was in your face, but not being in your face. If it kind of makes sense, you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I think that makes perfect sense. Um, and you know, and for a lot of people, that was one of kind of, I guess, the critiques of Slaanesh, against Slaanesh, back in those like 6th edition days, was that Slaanesh kind of got pigeonholed compared to the other 3 gods.
Yeah.
And like in particular that it was almost kind of a meme of like you'd have all of your like normal players at a tournament or whatever, and then there'd be the Slaanesh guy who would show up with an army, and like whether his army was just going to be the official minis or like the kind of army where they put down, you'd be like, ooh, I can't take pictures of your army. but but that started to change going into later editions, especially because it almost seems like Slaanesh, I don't want to say this was intentional, but Slaanesh, particularly in the older editions, just frankly had really bad rules. As far as like Slaanesh was very difficult to play, and was not very well developed, and had like it was very edgy, and it seemed like drawn to try and pull people in, but like and I don't know if you could flesh this out a little bit more about your experiences playing in the earlier editions like 5th, 6th, and 7th. Well, let's say 5th and 6th. But my memory is that in 5th and 6th, especially, even in 7th, Slaanesh was terrible, like just awful.
Oh yeah, yeah. Like I said, favorite Chaos God, but wouldn't play it because it was just not good, and people would complain. I mean, back in the day, you know, you could usually send in the emails and stuff like that, and you get a decent amount of responses sometimes, and it's like, this needs to be fixed. This needs to be fixed. But Slaanesh always got kind of shafted. Like you said, it was a intro god because, of course, you had the whole sex appeal because you know the Diaz minis stuff like that. I mean, it was just pretty much naked demonettes. But there was no actual push to make Slaanesh as good or close to being as good as the other 3 gods. But then again, Chaos, in terms of the additions, was always kind of weird because, like, who would have thought by the end of 8th, Zinch would be the strongest in terms of melee combat, you know? And that just confused me, like,
Yeah,
massively.
yeah. Corn definitely got shafted once we got late enough into the editions. But
Mm.
you know, one of the things that I found super interesting about Slaanesh is that in those earlier editions, the big problem with Slaanesh is it really just felt like Games Workshop didn't know what to do with Slaanesh on the tabletop. Like they loved writing Slaanesh's villains in a lot of books. If you read a lot of Black Library books from the late 90s or the very early 2000s, Slaanesh was a major hit. I would say that Slaanesh was probably one of the most popular because they could just make them ridiculous. And there were certain kinds of non-consensual acts that Games Workshop really liked to just kind of throw out to try and establish how scummy a villain was. But and Slaanesh, so Slaanesh was almost kind of this like propped up target of like, look how evil chaos is, you know. But Slaanesh wasn't terribly threatening in that it had like a very subpar magic system. I think early Slaanesh had armor piercing, but that was like it, because always strike first didn't exist yet. It was more of it was an initiative based system, but in the earlier editions, well, you know this, but for chat, the problem with earlier based edition systems when it came to initiative was that if your opponent charged you, they got to go first regardless of how fast you were. So Slaanesh, just its only gimmick was that it had like, one armor piercing. Great. Back in the days of like, I'm easily getting down to 2s or less than 2s to save. But then 7th edition happened. And while I think Slaanesh definitely got even better in 8th, 7th edition introduced the concept of always strike first. Which really changed the game up for Slaanesh.
It was a game changer all around, to be honest, because that just that rule is glorious, especially for like elves, and it did help the Slaaneshi forces out a lot. Then again, demons did get kind of broken because that was a certain someone's addition whose name will not be spoken about here.
When it comes to tabletop rules, yeah, that's true. That's true. That book did kind of just break the game in half. But Slaanesh did see some like really interesting mileage, and you're right that we started to see interesting characters pop up. Sigvald became kind of the patron representative of Slaanesh, and he was not really he kind of had that sex, drugs, and rock and roll flair, but he was more of just like supreme arrogance and like pride embodied, as opposed to just like a character who was just like a deviant. That was like their only thing. We also saw the redevelopment of the mask into more of like a punishment of excess, where this demon would appear if you were partying too hard, and she would punish all the party goers. And then of course you had Nakari, who was unfortunately the punching bag of every edition. But
was that the time that we also had the redo of these Sigmar books too?
Yeah, so that was in 7th edition was, I believe, when they started rewriting, or they really started going ham on what were known as the Time of Legend series. And that resulted in the Sigmar trilogy, which of course the second book, which a lot of people thought on picking it up was going to be about Morcar, is not about Morcar. It's actually more about Azazel.
My boy.
Yeah, feel free to talk a little bit about Azazel.
I absolutely love this character. Like I've got 2 of his mini. I've got 1 painted, and I've still got another one new in box because I didn't want to just in case, I just wanted to have it there for my collection. He's a demon prince of Slaanesh. He's actually from the same tribe as Sigmar himself, almost killing Sigmar way back in the day. This is a character which is one of those very few that can literally say, I almost killed Sigmar Heldenhammer, and that it's a big thing. He's got one of the best quotes in the lore. Like I think anyone who does a lore video on him usually starts off by citing that specific quote, about falling to temptation and so on. It's so good. Like the character had a lot of depth, and it brought a new element of just bringing Slaanesh into the playing field. This was a big character, same as Sigvald. Eventually, we started getting some characters that finally made a lot of sense. Because, yeah, we had some cool characters prior to that. We had T'Challa and so on. But when it came to Chaos, obviously, we had 1 character, 1 model, maybe mentions of 2 or 3 other characters, and that's it. and everyone else got loads of stuff. And Azazel came out here, and he just appeared out of nowhere. It was one of the first few named demon princes too that had a model too, wasn't it?
Yeah, I believe so.
So obviously for Slaanesh fans, that was a really big thing. And yeah, like the model hasn't really aged well, but it's still one of my favorites to look at. It's just so good, you know?
Yeah, well, it certainly has a very striking, and I did put it up on my stream for anyone that wants to see it or catch it in the VOD, but it has a very striking visual design, and like he said, Azazel was particularly interesting because, if memory serves, he's literally Sigmar's brother-in-law. Like, he's not just, like, part of his tribe, he's, like, part of his family.
Yeah.
Because he was the brother of the woman Sigmar loved. And, but so you had these like really cool characters popping up, and Slaanesh started to really get some development and leaning more into that temptation angle, which, like Nathan said earlier, one of the things we really got to see in kind of the RPG setting was that the RPG guys really started to work really hard on Slaanesh as kind of the Prince of Temptation. You know, Slaanesh has always been a very Satan analog character, you know, the Prince of Darkness, the you know, this beautiful, strange, unknowable creature that lures people into sin and temptation until they end up falling because they played Magic the Gathering or D&D too much, as they warned us in the 90s. But they started to do a lot of really interesting things with trying to pull Slaanesh away from just being a pure sex fiend and being more about, you know, in 40k we saw a lot of focus on like noise marines and things about like cacophonic sound, where it was more like sensations taken to an extreme to where they become deadly. Whereas in fantasy, they started really focusing on how Slaanesh works within civilizations. In that it used to be that, like you mentioned with the purple hand, Tzeentch was the chaos god that you had to fear if you lived in civilized society. We're like, oh, Tzeentch is skulking around every corner, and you know there are plots within plots and wizards and all this stuff. But then, especially in like the second edition Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay RPG, they really started doing like, you know what? In society, you have to worry about Slaanesh, because when people get comfortable, people get bored, and when people get bored, they start turning to hedonism. You know, they start engaging heavily in trying to find excitement or pleasure in a life that otherwise doesn't have those things, and that led to Slaanesh becoming, I think, one of the more popular gods when it came to having cults within like safe zones.
Yeah. I mean, we started noticing that Slaanesha's influences wasn't just in the human nations too. Like it was very common through even high elf territories in Ulthuan and so on, which is rare. And that's why, for me, that was like really impressive out of that god, because obviously any sort of chaos magic and stuff like that seeping into Ulthuan is like next to impossible in most cases. But that's like when we start getting all the stuff with the T'Challa and so on. So like it was impressive, you know?
Yeah, and that's a great point to kind of focus on for a minute, is that Slaanesh did have a very deep and intrinsic relationship with elves. The original reason, or the original cult of pleasure, started by Morathi, which kind of led to the whole incident of the Sundering, which was their civil war, was Slaanesh. It was retconned in later editions to be Authority, but Authority didn't exist back then. It was just Slaanesh. So you're right that one of the things that made Slaanesh so impressive, and I think this is something Games Workshop tried really hard to work on, that they started to finally hit their stride with, was the idea that Slaanesh was the youngest of the four major powers, but there was always, you know, the Games Workshop introduced a prophecy where the reason Slaanesh is known as the Dark Prince is because he is prophesied to become the strongest eventually, and to overtake his brothers. And we kind of see how his influence is very unique compared to the other three, because the other three would never have a chance in hell at corrupting a non-human race traditionally, whereas Slaanesh got really in there with the elves. I mean, he was bed buddies big time.
Exactly, and like Slaanesh, I remember reading it was this theory on, I think it was probably the Under Empire website, where someone had a theory where, because obviously the other Chaos Gods, they focus on, learning and war and so on, but if a Core Knight takes pleasure in killing, that is further empowering Slaanesh. If a Tzeentchian takes pleasure in learning, that's further empowering Slaanesh.
Yeah, and that's that's what makes being the god of excess so strong is that no matter what, especially chaos, which never does anything subtly, they're always all in. And Slaanesh is able to take advantage of that. But with the Dark Elves, we got to see some really cool development with Slaanesh in that Morathi was almost uh Morathi always had this really interesting, if you go back far enough, had this interesting design where she kind of had one foot in both camps. On
Yeah,
one hand, she was really big with Cain, who was like the evil god of the Elven pantheon, and then the other foot she was with Slaanesh. And that the story with Morathi, for anyone not aware, is the first time we ever meet Morathi in the lore is that she was essentially like a seeress or a prophetess, kind of. She was like really, really good at being able to like see the future, and she was captured by a roving band of Slaanesh demons. And for some mysterious reason, they didn't kill her long enough that Anarion and all of his buddies were able to ride up and save the day. And so they ended up saving Morathi from the clutches of the demons. But it's very kind of heavily implied that Morathi was probably not in any genuine mortal danger, likely because she had made some kind of pact with them, because that's what Morathi specializes in. Because you can't talk about Slaanesh and not talk about Morathi.
yeah.
And that Morathi is a character that specializes in making pacts with demons or gods. She's very good at striking deals and making sure it doesn't come back to bite her in the ass, or at least like entangling her deals to the extent that like she's playing the people that want to call her debts against each other.
Mm.
But it was Morathi who really introduced Slaanesh to the elves as not an enemy, because of course during the Great Cataclysm, Slaanesh was the primary antagonist for the elves.
Yeah.
Because Slaanesh loves elven souls more than any other, because they can experience far more intense sensations than any other. But that led us to the Storm of Chaos, which the Storm of Chaos was, I think, a very exciting time for Slaanesh and Dark Elf fans because it introduced the actual Cult of Pleasure.
And that was a fantastic list, which was actually playable.
Yeah, do you want to talk a little bit about did you have any experience playing the Cult of Pleasure? And if you did, could you like kind of walk us through the playstyle of the army and like what it was? What was so fun and different about it?
So it was a mixture of both. Well, actually, it was a mixture of three different things, to be honest. It had Chaos Warriors, it had Dark Elves, and it had Demons. And it was all purely Slaaneshi themed. A lot of stuff was changed around. It was pretty much to the point that you were learning three armies, but in all reality, it was none of the good stuff from all three, but mixed up. They actually paired really nicely. It was during a time that, of course, Games Workshop were experimenting with theme lists and so on. But I think that Slaanesh played out very well. I remember playing a campaign in my local GW. Well, it's not really local; it's 2 hours away. But I stayed the weekend over there, and we were playing, and it was actually fairly competitive. I remember it was, I think it was the Slaaneshi Noble with paired up with a bunch of Chaos Warriors. It was just so long ago, but I remember not doing so badly. I didn't win, but that was at a point that it was satisfying to play because you obviously had a lot of really cool stuff with the mixture, and I don't think any other list was that heavily mixed. Because, well, yeah, you had Middenheim, which was Kit Bash.
Oh
Yeah, this
yeah,
was
I believe it was the only genuinely mixed army.
yeah, and
The,
it was. Sorry, Karen.
because for anyone unaware, the Storm of Chaos, like Nathan said, introduced a lot of sub factions. It was really the first time in well, it wasn't the first time, but in fantasy they had ideas of subfactions that were introduced in various army books. For instance, if you owned the 6th edition Lizardmen book, at the very back there were rules for playing Southlands Lizardmen, which were slightly different. It had some unique units, but the Storm of Chaos, they really ran with it to the extent where they introduced the Cult of Pleasure, which we're gonna keep talking about a little bit more. But they also had like the Slayer army of Karakadrin, where you could take new kinds of Slayers in an all Slayer army. They also had like you mentioned, the Wolves of Middenheim, or there was like a Crusade list for Bretonia, like an Eritrea War list. There
Hmm.
was Clan Eshin. Clan Eshin got their army list introduced, where they had the Clan Eshin sorcerers, and um, they were all over the place. Not Sea Lord Island was introduced as a playable character because we got the Sea Guard for the High Elves. So a lot of these armies had unique sub factions introduced that had a lot of really cool, unique rules, and many of them were very powerful. Um, the Slaanesh one though was the only one, if memory serves, that actually introduced a genuine mixed army. As
Yeah,
far as that, not only were you taking elves, but you were taking, like he said, warriors of chaos, marauders, and demons. You know, you could have a keeper of secrets on the table. You could have demonettes as core. You could have marauders and stuff, which was great for the dark elves. Being such an elite army, being able to have disposable chaff units was great. And we've actually seen a lot of these armies. Most of them, in fact, have appeared now in Total War Warhammer. Not all of them have been fully developed to the extent that we hope, but like Deathmaster Snitch is literally just the Eshin army from that time and got all of the characters and magic and stuff. I
yeah,
think both me and Nathan would really like to see Morathy get the full treatment during Warhammer 3, where maybe she could get access to some demons. Maybe and maybe like one of the warrior units that will probably come with the mono Slaanesh army to just let
yeah.
her, really embrace that classic Cult of Pleasure design.
It
Um,
would be really cool, especially since like they could just supplement getting rid of some stuff because it's possible. I've been seeing it lately because I've been experimenting with modding myself and learning from some modders, and they've actually done a Cult of Pleasure and like bringing in like the modded demonettes and stuff like that. It's very possible. I think CA could do that, and it would get a massive kick out of the old guards from 6th edition who are definitely playing this game. You know?
yeah, and it just kind of fits because clearly the Morathy of Total War Warhammer 2 is designed after her Storm of Chaos iteration,
Mm.
where while she does, still have all the Hakardi and authority and all that other stuff, she spreads chaos corruption, which she wouldn't be doing if she wasn't leaning on that old thing. And it would also potentially introduce a really cool new character in that one of the only, if memory serves, the only unique model that we had for the Cult of Pleasure back at the Storm of Chaos were known as the Anointed of Slaanesh, which were they were essentially like mini Malice Darkblades. So they were dreadlords who made bargains with demons to be possessed by the demons, which made them really really powerful. So it would kind of be like you wouldn't have a dreadlord, but instead you'd have this guy with a way better stat line because he had a demon inside of him,
Mm.
which was just awesome. And they actually fought against the Lizardmen because I remember the Storm of Chaos campaign very well. In that a lot of the armies were like in matchups, and you could report them to your local hobby store or on the website back in ye internet days. But I remember playing games against the Anointed because I played Lizardmen, and the whole point with the Slaaneshi forces is that they were invading Lustria. So there were a lot of thematic battles for the Storm of Chaos between the Lizardmen and the Cult of Pleasure, which was just super fun.
We had a tournament in the Malaga Games Workshop, so it's about 2 hours drive away, and it was really really cool because the store owner went like full ham, getting like artwork put up on the walls and stuff like that. It was great. It was like one of the best events ever, especially because it was like the original End Times. Let's be very very honest. It was
Yeah,
the
yeah, it
original,
was absolutely.
but like it was just done in such a way, and the lore was good. The theme list was fantastic. I know a lot of people, like one of my next door neighbors has a Karakadrin army, right? Like, he,
It's awesome.
and that's like all metal. Like it's literally all metal. If he takes the GW mini box, man, like you could kill someone by slapping them with it because it's just you've got this really heavy ass box, you know.
Yeah, and so I think to kind of get to the end of the Slaanesh discussion, let's talk about where Slaanesh is now. So there's a really interesting story behind Slaanesh for anyone not super familiar with Games Workshop and kind of the shenanigans, where it's heavily implied by a lot of people that know people or catch on to rumors and stuff that Slaanesh was essentially going to be put out to pasture. And that when Warhammer Fantasy went through the end times, Slaanesh was the least featured of the gods, and was the only one who did not really get any kind of showcase. Nakari was perma killed in one of the opening stages of Kane, and none of the other Slaanesh special characters except for Sigvald made an appearance, and Sigvald, of course, had a rather ignoble end after killing Krell. But between 40k and going into AOS, it seemed very heavily implied that Slaanesh the Games Workshop at the time, who a lot of people didn't like, and myself included, were trying to get rid of Slaanesh because they just viewed him as not um, advertiser friendly, I guess. Not, he was just a little too much. So a lot of the 40k elements of the Sons of the Emperor, or whatever they're called, were being heavily pushed to the side. And of course, Slaanesh in Age of Sigmar was no longer even a Chaos God. Slaanesh had been captured by the elves off screen and was imprisoned and was no longer active. And it was very strange. But they went through a significant restructuring at the company and brought in a lot of really clever members of like the older days, and Slaanesh was heavily reinvented to purely be the god of excess, but taken to its extreme, where we started seeing excess in the sense of being the best possible warrior, being a glutton, being greedy, being wrathful, being the best archer, trying to indulge in or hunt and indulge in sensations. Um, and I'd really like to hear Nathan talk a bit about how you felt once we were finally revealed, not that long ago, to be frank, about this new direction that they're taking Slaanesh in.
So I heard all the rumors the same as you did, and so on, and it was kind of weird as a Sneshi fan because in 8th edition, Slaanesh was living a golden age with the demon army. It was so micro intensive. If you knew how to play it, you could win constantly. So we thought, oh, this is going to go well. Then the end times happened, and we're like, well, if Slaanesh was doing well during 8th, logic would dictate that that would carry over to Age of Sigmar. At least we thought so. Then all the rumors started happening. It became a bit of an issue because obviously then GW started mentioning older Chaos Gods which had been removed from the lore prior, like Nekoho and so on. So a lot of us were thinking, oh god, the replacement is going to be a freaking god of atheism or something, which would have been a massive.
Yeah.
But then obviously the stirring started happening again, talking about the twins. And we're like, oh, okay, something's happening. They're mentioning Slaanesh a lot more. Now, me being pure panic mode, I was thinking, oh god, they're mentioning Slaanesh a lot because it's going to be a build-up, and then it's just going to be off with his head. And then, no. The newborn was born, and a new line came out, a beautiful line of models, and like a complete redesign to what Slaanesh should have always been and was represented in the 8th edition army book for the demons, where it was very skirmishing focused with like loads of fast moving stuff. We got loads of new seekers and so on. So like, and we got archers, and we had all these different changes which completely and drastically changed Slaanesh visually to the point that it represents. You remember those old like 6th edition artworks of the Chaos Warriors and so on? It changed. Like it looked like that. It reminded me a lot like Striker did. Like
Oh
Slaanesh,
yes, yes, the
Slaanesh.
Mirmadesh. The Mirmadesh are very old school Chaos Warrior.
Yeah, it went back to a proper harken of showcasing what Slaanesh should have been and the look. I mean, it's got like this very it's very weird though because it's a feel. It's kind of like you've seen 300, right?
Yes.
It's like the Persians in 300, isn't it? Like it's the troopers, the frontline troopers are very ostentatious and they're very out there. And then they've got the skirmishing ones with like with the veils and so on. And I absolutely like I lost my mind as soon as I saw those miniatures, man. Like I don't think I pre-ordered anything ever until that point. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's just crazy to see what the turnaround was. In that there have been two, like we just started third edition AOS, and in the two editions of AOS that we had, Slaanesh received a significant mini update in both editions. In that, in first edition, Slaanesh did not actually receive an. Or actually, you know what? No, they were both in second edition, weren't they? But
Yeah.
Slaanesh, the first time Slaanesh got a book in second edition, they updated the demon range. So
Mhm.
a lot of the old demon models were re-released. They updated the Fiends of Slaanesh. They updated I think they gave us the new Keepers of Secrets. They gave us the new Endless spells. They released Salaxi Hellbane, who was basically the replacement for Nakari. But like Salaxi Hellbane, you're like, okay, what is going to be like the ultimate warrior of like Slaanesh? Like, how do you do a greater demon? And it was that it's a demon that is obsessed with killing other greater demons, which is just awesome.
Yeah.
Hellbane is a very cool character. But it's like kind of the ultimate duelist as opposed to like the pure carnal rage of Scarbrand. And then so like many of the demon models were updated, and then they got another release later which brought out all the mortals. So we got a new Sigvald mini. Sigvald was brought back and made even more gorgeous somehow. And the Mirmadesh were released, which were, like he said, literally, like if you go back and look at the old Warrior of Chaos artwork where they had like themed warriors, the Mirmadesh look exactly like the old school champions of Slaanesh, but like a unit of them, which was super cool. And then they brought out the Blitzbarb archers. They were like, look, you kind of like got cultists now who aren't allowed in close combat because, and they almost had like a very Arabian Persian theme to them, which was really interesting. And then they also gave like a lot of new special characters. We got Glutos Arskelion, who is just literally, he's literally a glutton. He's a character that indulges in gluttony for the sake of gluttony, not because he's hungry like an ogre would be, but because he's just obsessed with trying new flavors. He wants to try
Yeah.
out, he wants to taste everything in the realms. Um, and then like the mask got a new model, and then the newborns came out, which are literally like actual large fragments of Slaanesh, so that Slaanesh can be active while still being imprisoned. It's just crazy. But just awesome stuff, and it's been wonderful to see how Slaanesh has developed. And I think we're both very, very excited to see Slaanesh's reveal for Total Warhammer 3, because hopefully it'll just be a colorful parade of insanity.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, like I'm really, really looking forward to it. Like I know a lot of people were like waiting for Zinch and Nurgle and so on. Like when I did that little post on Twitter, it's amazing how many heretics there are on Twitter, isn't it? But there is that thing like everyone's excited for Nurgle and Zinch and so on, and I get it. They're cool, man. But I want to see my purple boys, man. I want to see. I want to see just like really fast moving. Like if they play like they did in 8th edition, we're gonna see a very chariot based micro intensive
Oh
army.
yeah, they gotta be speedy. They gotta be speedy.
And I just can't wait for that, man. I honestly can't wait for that. And I mean we can already more or less guess it's gonna be Nikari as the legendary lord, which
That seems likely, but I mean, Nakari's gonna have a completely brand new design.
yeah.
Because like Nakari doesn't really have like the only time Nakari ever appeared in anything was weirdly enough the Warhammer MMO. Warhammer Online actually featured Nakari as the hardest boss in the game, because Nakari was the final boss of the final dungeon, which is wild that he actually was treated with respect by the MMO devs, but instead of just being like a random public quest boss. But and for anyone that hasn't seen it, there actually is artwork that was released back in the end of July, where Creative Assembly did put out like a little sneak peek of some of the stuff, and they showed off some demonettes. And the demonette art looks fantastic. It looks like a very clever interpretation, where it looks like they're taking kind of the more hermaphrodite approach to the demonettes, where like some are pure female and then some are like half male, half female, so that way they can show off boobs without having to go up to a M rating. They're male boobs. Don't worry about it. They're fine.
I did say when they actually released that artwork, I did post a little bit of thing on Twitter. It's like, because I had genuine fears about the Slaanesh, because like we said, Slaanesh has been shafted constantly since early, like really early editions. And I actually put on Twitter, it's like I should have had more faith in CA, because it is exactly how I envisioned them to look. And it's just artwork, right? That is just artwork. It's concept art. But if they look as good as that concept art in game, I'm going to be very happy, because like I'll be very honest, I don't care about the other gods. They could have been this is my baby, man. This is my baby. So I want her to shine, man. I want my Slaaneshi demonettes everywhere, and it's going to be me constantly playing Slaanesh as much as possible. And they just look good. And obviously we saw that rendering of the Keeper's Secrets, you know?
Yeah, that leaked image. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that was gorgeous. You know, it's the Age of Sigmar version, and a lot of people got a little bit pissed at it. But like,
it looks so much better though. The old one was hideous.
Exactly. Like, I wouldn't mind if the old one was the look from Nikari, just obviously supersized and so on. But like these Keeper Secrets, they look great. You know, they are gorgeous miniatures. I've got a bunch of them myself because I've got them on the old 50 by 50 bases for when I play 6th, and then obviously 100 by 150 bases when I play 8th. But they're just really good looking, and it's just so good. Like, honestly.
Yeah, I don't miss the thing I think a lot of fantasy fans don't understand, that are like fans of Total Warhammer, and they just like Google Slaanesh, is that the thing people need to understand is that the really like probably the super badass model that you're thinking is like the Slaanesh demon when you look it up is not actually what it was. There was a Forge World model that released that had like a pretty okay design. It was quite a bit different than the AOS design, but it was a good design. But the Forge World designs were mostly centered around like actual specific demons from 40k. Like the Bloodthirster wasn't just a Bloodthirster, it was Angron the Unbound, if memory serves, and stuff like that. And whereas in fantasy, the demons we had, the old Slaanesh, were ugly because they had bull heads, but because of the sculpting limitations at the time, they looked more like antelopes. They had very long heads that were super weird, or you could design them where they were cone heads. So they had really tall cone heads, and they had like really freaky faces, which they were just very bizarre looking. The new AOS design where they have like the sculpted chins, and they're like, you're like, yeah, I could see someone seeing that on a battlefield and be like, I want to get stepped on by that thing. Like I see that. Like, you know, it's like, it's understandable. And that's what Slaanesh needs to be. So, but I think we've done enough for Slaanesh. So it's time to move on to something a little more speculative, a little less of a history lesson. So one thing we wanted to talk about today that we thought would be fun is that me and Nathan are both going to discuss, with, you know, Total War Warhammer 2 having functionally been ended. You know, a lot of us, both of us, I think especially, are hoping for a patch, a large patch to fix a lot of issues. You know, make it where Kazrak actually has vanguarding Razor Gore chariots, make it where the chariots on the Wargore aren't just like the the wrath of God personified, and all this stuff. So we decided to each independently make a decision on if they were to do a last patch, could they, we hope and think they should do a Rakarth situation where they give us just a bonus legendary lord. So I'm gonna let Nathan go first. And Nathan, who, if you could pick any character to feature as a free LC character to be brought into Total War Warhammer 2, it can be from any race. But if you would tell us who would you want, why, and just kind of like a brief overview of like where would you want them to start, maybe some mechanic ideas, and like what they would do and stuff like that.
Okay, so I would want a vampire because it's the last base game race from Warhammer 2, Warhammer 1 that isn't in Warhammer 2 is playable in the Vortex. Now, a lot of people are going to think that I'm going to say Naparata, but I honestly think that she should be left until later, maybe in the Gash DLC. So my pick would actually be her brother, because I am a sucker for the Strigoi, and I kind of like the character. Yushiran is kind of cool. He's technically a vampire with morals. Gray area. And obviously his locations, you know, it can literally be anywhere. We've already got like a Strigoi like minor faction in Warhammer 2 in the Vortex, and obviously in Mortal Empires 2. It could.
Uh-oh. We good?
So
That was weird.
that your camera went off for a second. But like the character itself could be done a little differently. Where the case is like obviously we do have the whole thing with the Strigoni and stuff like that, so we could have a Strigoi legendary lord with some more humans than possibly Vlad or the Von Carsteiz himself have, because they only really have access to gunners and crossbows. But it would be nice to have something different with just some basic reskins of mounted yeomen and peasant archers and stuff like that, you know? Like, it takes no effort with a reskin, and obviously just some voice items.
Okay, so Shorin get some Strigani representation in there. Do you have any idea for like what you would want his like functionality to be? Like what kind of mechanics he would bring to the table? Any ideas in there?
In a point of sheer spite, because he was treated so badly, I'd say hunting down other vampire factions would be funny.
Just get revenge on all of them for abandoning his kids.
Yeah, because he was treated like crap, like constantly, right? So it'd just be kind of funny if in Mortal Empires, more than anything, he'd just be hunting down other factions and trying to reform, obviously, reform the Strigoi Empire, which would put him going to different locations and just capturing locations, possibly fighting off different factions there, with an end battle of an army being sent by Neferata, but we don't see Neferata, you know?
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, I think that could certainly be an interesting thing. What do you have an idea of where you'd want him to like start on the map? Would you just want to go in Morkheim, just where the current Strigoi faction is, or would you want him somewhere else?
Thing is, the Vortex map is just so full nowadays, isn't it? Like, it's
Yeah,
insanely
oh yeah,
full.
it's pretty stuffed.
Maybe put him, I don't know, obviously for the Mortal Empires, Morkheim just makes sense. Or maybe a location near it, so he has to travel to it and take it himself.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, for the Vortex, I don't know, man. Like it's a bit
Just
of
throw Nagaroth, right? Do another Nagaroth.
what kind of scares me is obviously because there's one depot left, which is usually attached to some form of content, and it's Green Jay. And then when I Google Green Jay, it's like, oh, it's a bird indigenous to Southern America. It's like, no more Lustria, please. I'll cry. I'll fucking cry.
I mean, there is some empty space in Lustria, but it's only on like the northeastern side where there's like nothing going on there.
Yeah.
Kind of up near like the like north of that weird little set of dark elf islands, around where like the blue orc tribe is.
It scares me to think anything else unless we're like, if anyone from CA is listening, please no more, please.
I don't think that would be too bad. Like maybe he could start on that little island north of the Dark Elf Fortress, where there's that little like island out by itself.
Yeah, that's not too bad. Yeah, that's
But
actually quite far away.
yeah, I don't think there's anything else up there. I mean, I think the closest person to him would be Teclis, but who is still a good way south. All right, so
Good enemy.
fair answer, fair answer. Um, for my answer, I have a very similar train of thought, but I, of course, went with Zacharias, my boy, my boy. So for me, I would want to go with Zacharias the Ever Living, because he is my favorite, and I think terribly underappreciated by the vampire communities. They need more. They need to have more respect for the super caster lord. I'm gonna pull up some artwork on him here on stream because he's just ugly as sin. He's like basically just a giant, like just a super scraggly corpse on a big zombie dragon. So my design idea for Zacharias would be to, as far as his start location goes, I would have it in the Vortex campaign and Mortal Empires for him to start in Kasabar. So to start in the deserts to the far south, kind of like looking for ancient knowledge and stuff. Um, and hopefully add his fortress to like the Northern Empire, and like to make his way back home to his tower that's maybe
Yeah.
been taken over by Wazoran in the shape of Melchior, because Wazoran possessed Melchior's body and is kind of crazy, but is still out there somewhere. So maybe it could be fun that when Zacharias leaves, Melchior comes back and takes back the tower. Uh, but the thing I like about Zacharias, as far as I'd have his mechanic system go, is that I would have it where Zacharias is a super magically powerful character, not dissimilar to Manfred, but he's just all in on the lore of vampires, right? He's not like Manfred where he's got the lore of vampires and the lore of death. But what separates him from the likes of Kimmler, obviously, is that he goes all the way up to a zombie dragon. And I would introduce for him the classic ability to create undead like the Necrarchs do in the lore. So I would actually pinch off from Throt the Unclean's mechanic, where Zacharias has like a flesh crafting or corpse crafting mechanic system where you're able to use his sorceries and stuff and steal knowledge from other races to customize your units and to give them unique abilities and stuff very similar to Throt's mechanic. So that you're creating like zombies that have poisoned attacks, or maybe you're creating like crypt horrors that have armor, or or like introduce like a lot of really unique abilities. And the big thing I would do that I think would be a fun mechanic for him, that could be a lot of fun, is give him the ability, because he's so magically powerful and being able to like once as he's going around just trying to collect knowledge and become like this super powerful sorcerer, give him maybe at some point in his campaign the ability to recruit unridden zombie dragons, so he could just like have dragons like all the other dragon races can, where they can like take dragons without riders. But
Yeah.
for him, he's able to take the zombie dragons uniquely. I think that would be a lot of fun. Uh, of course, and like, since he's Necrarch, I imagine you'd want to do this with a Strigoi or Lamian character or a Blood Dragon, where like if you start with those characters, I think they should start with like the first slot for that bloodline unlocked, or something. But I think that would be super fun. His campaign is just kind of about like stealing ancient knowledge from various races to master, to become stronger than Nagash when it comes to sorcery, and also to make your way back to take over your tower from Melchior and have your big final climactic showdown with your old teacher and punch him in the face. but to show him who the true king of the Necrarchs is. That would be in Mortal Empires, and in Vortex I would also still have it that Melchior's around somewhere, but maybe you have to like find him because he's running around trying to perform some ritual, and Zacharias is trying to stop him.
Okay, cool. I like that idea. I mean, the most important thing is we're both in agreement. No more Von Carsteins.
Yeah, no more. No, the only reason there should be another von Karstein is for Conrad, and Conrad should be a legendary hero, not a legendary
Yes.
lord. I will die on that hill.
Yeah. No. Exactly.
Like,
Exactly.
Conrad can't cast magic. He should not be a vampire count legendary lord.
Yeah. I like the idea, honestly. I actually really like the idea. Zacharias is a really cool character too. Um, I think I've got his model somewhere actually.
He has a really cool mini because his dragon
Yeah.
had a very like it spirals up on
Yeah.
the model, which is super unique. It wasn't just like a giant S like most of the dragons then were.
If he starts down south where you said, it will give him incentive to go all the way up to his tower, which was in Os.
His tower is like just next to the middle mountains, so it's
Yeah.
a little bit west of Hockland.
Yeah. So it will give him incentive to go up that way. There's just that'd be kind of cool because a lot of time you don't get too much you don't really have too much reason to explore too far, especially with these campaigns because they do get a little long, and you kind of
Yeah,
finish.
I think that's kind of I really enjoy campaigns like Belagars or Skarsneks where it's like you're trying to get somewhere. You're not just building in place until some magical thing ticks and you're done.
Yeah. Yeah.
I do like the ones where it's like, okay, you don't have to conquer everything between here and there, but your goal is to get there. Um, those are really fun, and I do agree with you that I think a Strigoi character would be amazing as well. I think personally I would go for Vorag Bloodytooth over Ushoran, but I think either would be great. But I just want a playable character for every bloodline. I just want one lord for every bloodline.
Exactly that. That would just be so cool. Like there's just so many options, and there's so many cool things about each of the bloodlines. If the bloodlines can be done at least a little bit uniquely with mechanics, it would just be incredible.
Yeah, but like I actually, honestly, when I think about it more though, I think I actually agree more with you that I think it would be better to do like Vorag Bloodytooth or Ushoran as a free LC gimme lord and save. I think Zacharias would probably feature better as a DLC because there are like tons of units he could come with of like, hey, here are like spirit hosts and unholy armor and patchwork men and the abyssal terror. Where's my abyssal terror mount? CA, come on.
Oh, wait for Spirit Host, man! I literally cannot wait for Spirit Host.
Yeah, spirit host would be super. We need more. We need more spooks. All right,
Yeah.
so that's gonna be it for that segment. Now we're gonna talk. We're gonna shift gears pretty hard here for a minute. Which is we're gonna talk a little bit about ourselves, which is probably what we should have done the first episode. So it's not quite such a random like who are these guys and why are they here. So we're gonna spend a little bit of time covering our backstories and talking, kind of the men behind the podcast, a little bit of a situation here. And I'll be watching my chat, and I would encourage Nation to watch his as well for any like particular questions that may come up during this segment. This would be kind of a good time to keep an eye out for interesting ones. But I'm gonna start by asking Nathan a few questions. As far as so, let's talk about what was your origin into the hobby? Like what was your starting tale for coming into Warhammer Fantasy?
One thing very quickly. Can I go pick up another Red Bull? Because the mini fridge is still not
No,
working.
yes,
Give me just 1 sec. Just the mini fridge is still fucking cooling down.
go for it, dude. Behind the beard. I hope you're all doing well. This is a super fun series to get together and do, and I'm been really pleased by the reception. Everyone seems to be really enjoying it, which is great. All right, you good? You refueled?
Now I am.
Hashtag not sponsored.
Sponsor me, please.
By the way, even though we're only on our second episode of the series, if anyone would like to sponsor us, I mean, we're listening. we would gladly accept money, to prop up anything, literally anything. It doesn't even have to be good. Just contact me.
Shadow Legends.
Yeah, really. We'll fucking do it. All right. So, what was your origin with Warhammer Fantasy? What brought you to this hobby?
So, I got into Warhammer at a very early age because I grew up, just little context, I was a sick kid growing up. I needed a lot of injections and so on. I was about 2.5 months premature. So, and Jib being so polluted, I wasn't spending a lot of time outside and so on. It was just hospital, home, hospital, home, hospital, home. So, mum wanted me to get a hobby, and it was around when I was 4 years old. We actually stumbled across a big cutout of a Space Marine, Ultramarine, in the old school yellow and blue. That was a little hobby shop that we have. It's actually a kebab shop now, but
Oh no.
no, the dude retired. A lovely guy, but he did retire. He made his killing. But I got into the hobby because of that, because my mom wanted something that she could do with me, which didn't require me to be outside and so on. Started with 40k. She painted mostly because obviously I was 4. But as the time progressed, started getting into it more and more.
Okay, so real quick, as memories stick with you as a 4-year-old, what was your interaction with the hobby? Was it just that, like, you really liked looking at the minis, liked reading the stories? Like, what was it that what was your starting relationship there?
So I was a small kid, man, like tiny, right? Like I didn't actually start growing properly until I was like 16, and that was thanks to like steroid injections. But like I was tiny, like camera, I was like this, and I was watching this absolutely massive cutout to, well, it was massive to me,
Yeah.
of a space marine all bulky and stuff, right? And for me, that was just like, wow, what is that, you know? And I loved looking at the minis. It was something that I really wanted to look at and play with, because obviously, you know, they were toys for me. And it got through there. Like my mum got into the hobby through it too, and started progressing through it. Then I kind of realized I like guns, I like tanks, but I really like swords, magic, and you know, just like dragons. You know, that stuff is awesome. You know, and
Yeah, you came to the conclusion of which one was naturally superior. Yes.
yeah, it was a box. I started off actually with the Empire. Funny enough, it was because it was the easiest to paint at that point. I think I was around 8, 9, something like that, and it was an Empire box, just a basic. That was when they used to come in weird numbers. Remember the Men at Arms box was like what, 19 units, because you had to buy the commander as a blister pack.
Yeah.
Weird. But like I started with that, and then I started expanding into orcs. I've actually just been stripping down some of my old orcs recently too. Started getting into orcs, started getting into Skaven, and just buying everything because I was like, oh wow, this is just so much cooler than guns and just spaceships. I think this is magic where one spell is basically destroying armies, because at that point I started reading the fluff. You know, you read about Nagash doing basically deleting the Hekara from what it was, reshaping it into Land of the Dead.
Yeah. So would you say that 5th edition was when you like got to the point where you were really able to like process the game and be able to start like enjoying the experience?
5th was when I was like really starting to get into the lore and the game more. Back before that, it was just painting and kind of just enjoying looking at the minis, because like a lot of the cast, they were gorgeous, and they still hold up to this day. You know, like they were just really, really good. And it was just like, it was a universe that I felt very at home with. Over the years, it's been a place of comfort and I've met loads of great people through the hobby. So like, more so through fantasy than 40k, I've got to say.
So let's talk about so you mentioned earlier in the podcast, and like we've talked about this in the past, that you like most of your experience in the long run ended up being around like competitive play, or at the very least just playing the game. So when did you start getting in competitive fantasy games, and what was your route through the hobby through that method?
My thought with competitive play was probably six, because that's pretty much when that tasty Skaven list started. So it was like, ooh, this is when my love of Skaven really started to. Oh, look at these! There's Ratmen, and you can bring really loads of them for like no points, basically, and outnumber your enemy horrendously much. So like that's when I started getting really, really into it. When I got really competitive, and I mean screaming at my other opponent for the table and like just really, really bad and just playing constantly and so on, was eighth. Eighth to me was I think that was around the time of I just finished my exams and I found myself with a lot more free time. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to dive into competitive play. Spain has started getting a lot of players too, like tournaments everywhere. Like towns in Spain are really, really close, right? At some point, some of them just even overlap over each other. And they were just tourneys, 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 tourneys. I was like, oh, I really want to get into this. And let's be honest, Skaven for eighth were.
Yeah, that steadfast rule is bullshit.
I got really, really into it. I was playing horrendously. Like, I think it was like I was losing at the beginning very, very much because I was dealing with a lot of high elf players. They were really popular. Um, then I started experimenting, and what I was doing is I was taking notes as I was playing, because obviously that was pre-battle scribe days and so on. Everything had to be written down, handwriting.
Yeah, the good old days. Everything was written in charcoal on stone wall. Yeah.
It was just like I was getting really into it. I still have some of those lists written and everything. It's like you just take notes as you play, and you go into tournaments sometimes blind just to throw yourself into the deep end to realize where you were learning. Like because you learn as you play, right? Like sometimes, as much studying as you could do, you could never be prepared for a chariot build of Zinch. You could never be prepared for like what was it the Dark Elf feigns where you charge them and then they just feign back into another location and so on. It
Oh
was
yeah, yeah, and yeah, you had to just play a lot of games to figure out what the hell every faction was up to.
yeah, and it was just like that was my golden age. I wish we would have like obviously seen a ninth. I must admit though that obviously 8.5 was very kind to Skaven too, because obviously then we had the and I did take a part in tournaments because of it, because obviously we got mixed in with chaos, and that meant that we could summon in with some of the Infernal Legion. So at some point, I was summoning in freaking plague bearers at the front of my forces. And
Yeah, just yeah, the host of the Ever Chosen, crazy shit.
it was
Um,
pure fun.
okay, so speaking of the end times, what happened? So what was your experience with the end of the world?
I quit. I took a break. I played. I played until the end. We all knew what was coming because two books in, we got told by the manager at the store. It's like, yeah, this is going to end. It's like, well, make the best of it because I still played 40k, but like it wasn't my scene. I played. I demolished. I did as much damage as I could, and then afterwards I said, all right, I'm going to pack up my armies, put them to retire, and yeah, it was kind of sad, but I wasn't going to sell my minis. There's way too much emotional attachment for an army that you've been playing.
What you didn't burn them on the grill like true heroes?
Yeah,
True heroes of the hobby did?
some freaking edgy black metal on that. My God, I saw that video and I was thinking, what possesses someone to
That, that,
get rid
that,
of?
that was a guy from my ballpark. That's the saddest part. So I'm pretty sure I played against that guy at some point,
It
or at
was
least I've been in
so
the same hall as him.
like, could you imagine, like, if you were quitting for good? Like, if I knew that I was going to get rid of my minis, I would give it to someone who would appreciate the minis or sell them. Not there. Let's just fucking douse it on gasoline.
Yeah, no, dude. I've got. Maybe he was someone that just really enjoyed burning things that were worth a lot of money. Like he was actually just a pyromaniac who was like, "Hey, I could do this on film, and people will call me a hero." Looks like a
Right.
dumbass now, but well, it looked at like a dumbass at the time too. But um, so okay, so fantasy ends. You put away your stuff. You know they collect dust. When do you return? When is the glorious resurrection finally reach you over in Gibraltar?
So I was taking a bit of a break, and I was having a holiday in I think it was in Almeria in Spain. And I walked into a hobby shop because I still went and I still sometimes bought some minis and stuff because I still enjoyed the painting, right? And there were people playing fantasy, man. And I was like, "Ooh, what's going on?" You know, it's like, "Oh no, yeah, some of us still play." There's a big scene in Spain because this is going to be it's going to sound like an insult, but it's actually a compliment to Spain. They're like 20 years behind, like so is Gibraltar. We're very much the same people, so everything is kind of new to them. So fantasy is like really, really stupidly popular here. It's like a gym in Spain,
I
right?
was I
Spain,
was about to make a really tasteless joke, but I'm not going to. So let's just keep moving.
it's amazing. Like nothing's happened, and it's really popular. Like holy crap, man! I travel through Spain a lot, and well, prior to the plague, and, and I'll message one of the fantasy groups because I'm in like 8 WhatsApp groups which are like full, and it's just the Spanish scene, and it's just like, oh yeah, there's a tourney happening in Estepona, or there's a tournament happening in Granada. Like, fuck it, man, I'm around that area. I'll pop right and say hi and look at the armies, and maybe even get a cheeky game in. And it's insane. So at that point, I was like, man, people are still playing. Maybe I was stupid of me just to retire the armies. I want to get a game in. And there was a tournament happening in Puerto Duquesa, which is like a 45-minute drive away. I was like, yeah, fuck it, man. It's in 2 weeks. I've got time to like get the armies out, read the books, kind of get with my bearings again. And I played, and I came third, man. It was like you know, it's just like riding a bike,
Oh yeah, yeah, that shit's great.
and it was just like I remember just going in there. It's kind of like when you're foaming at the mouth because you haven't been there in so long. I shit you not, man. I finished. I sat down. I was like, this feels good. This feels so good.
Yeah,
And I
man.
carried on. I just carried on playing. At that point, I found out that a lot of the locals were still playing, so I carried on playing with them. I was doing loads of tournaments. It got to the point that because I travel a lot to metal festivals across Europe, because I love heavy metal, and there's one Hellfest in Glisson. I have to stop in Nantes, which has a GW store, and they still have people playing freaking fantasy. I walked in there once, and they're like, "Oh yeah, yeah, we've got some armies you can use if you want. If you want to have a game." And I
Oh,
was like,
yeah, that's cool.
"Yes." It was actually a Demons of Nurgle army I used there. It was really good. Like I know shit all about Nurgle forces because it's tough. There's high toughness, not a lot of high movement, barring of course the flyers and so on. But I still had the time of my freaking life, man. And I was like, damn. And then obviously I started looking at the circuits, and you know, there's the Facebook groups I invited you to and stuff like that. You know, there's so many active scenes. It's amazing that the hobby didn't die. So for me, it just kind of like brought the spark back.
Yeah, like yeah, you walk in, you're like, oh, we're the party never ended. It's still 1999 in here.
Yeah. Because of that, I was like, oh, I'll get back into 40K. I'll try out Age of Sigmar, and I'll try out the new edition of Blood Bowl, stuff like that. And I was like, well, I sold my soul to Games Workshop again.
Well, awesome, dude. And when did Total War show up on this timescale? Oh, oh, I can't hear you.
Pretty out.
There you go. There
Oh,
you go. Now I can hear you.
um, Total War had already been out. I was enjoying it. I was playing it a lot, but and it made me want to come back to it. But I was still always thinking, you know, the hobby's dead. Like for me mentally, I was thinking, holy crap, man! If this game would have come out when fantasy was alive, we would have probably overtaken 40k in popularity, you know, because like, it's
Yeah,
all,
so it was really seeing the hobby still being played that really like got you back.
oh yeah, like I was still buying minis. I remember when Vlad got released for Warhammer 1, I bought the Vlad mini because I had the old metal one and they had the but I lost it. I found it again recently, but it was like caked in paint. So it was like, but I bought the resin one, the Finecast one. I was like, oh, you know, this is fun, and it was nice getting back to painting and so on because I do it, but sparsely. It's just it was nice to get back into the hobby in one way, shape, or form. That was my Warhammer fantasy at that point. It was like all that was left. At least that's all I thought that was left, you know.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Yeah, that's great. And kind of another thing I think that's worth asking for all Warhammer Fantasy fans, because this tends to come with like a really interesting set of answers. But what would you say was like the kind of the ultimate takeaway from like the fantasy hobby? Like what made it so special as far as like something that even after years of
I think you disconnected.
you still with me? Hello?
Yeah,
Okay. I don't know why it does that sometimes, but whatever.
yeah.
So what was it that what is it about Warhammer Fantasy do you think, in your opinion, that makes it such a important and critical experience to your life?
You know, when it comes to just Warhammer in general, like I said, you know, I grew up as a sick kid. I didn't leave the house a lot until I was like 10. This was my main comfort other than gaming. It's just a universe that I felt very much at home with, and it was just something that is very important. Warhammer Fantasy to me has embodied so much of my childhood that to me, I can't really imagine the universe without. Like, I can't imagine my life without that universe. You know, it forms a big part of who I am. I'm a very competitive player. Like, it almost to the point of toxicity, right? Uh,
Yeah, you heard it here first.
but
Nathan's a toxic player.
but like it's always been me, right? Like eventually, when I got better health wise, I started taking part in martial arts, so right, and I was competitive there. When it came to clubs and so on, it was the same thing. And I took a lot of that into Warhammer. You know, like I wanted to be the best player. I wanted to be this. It kind of pushes you. You know, you want to be the best in a sense, right?
Oh yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
it breeds health. Like competition is healthy, so like, especially for a growing kid, it teaches you to be humble still, because obviously you're going to get your ass handed to you multiple times, and it's really important. That's what I learned a lot about like the hobby itself. Um, I would say that obviously I spent way too much money on it because
You know, well, I mean, yeah, but you know, it's what you enjoy doing, so
yeah,
it's not technically a waste.
I would buy stuff just because it's pretty, you know, just because. Oh, while I'm here, like I've got like I don't even want to look at that, right?
Hey,
So,
what is the point of money if not to serve a need, right? Just like bring you, you know, hoarding money for the sake of it is just you're never going to be happy that way, right? You got to do things with it.
definitely, definitely. Like I've got like a lot of different hobbies that isn't just Warhammer. So I like to try and put them together. Like I play like 14 instruments, uh, but like Warhammer's always been this thing that I will always sink some cash every week into for some reason, even if I'm not doing anything that week Warhammer related.
It's called an
Like,
addiction. That's
oh yeah, yeah,
that's
it's
what
really
it
bad.
is.
I went into the store because we got a little shop. It's like they mostly do games, but like they got Warhammer, and I bought some aggressors for 40k because I'm building up one of the chapters, and it's like I'm looking at it like I'm probably not going to build you for about a month or two, but I might as well since I'm here and the box is here. It happens a lot. It's actually why I have like two Imperial Knights, which just I don't think I'm ever gonna get like paint them.
Fair enough. Fair enough. So is there anything else you think that you'd want to add as far as your experience with fantasy and like um helping people kind of have a good sense for what your relationship with it is as far as like nowadays?
Well, nowadays it's obviously focused around gaming, video game more than obviously so Warhammer and so on. Uh, it's a strange thing because I guess I can call it like a part-time job in a sense because it's a weird thing, this whole YouTube thing, right? Like obviously,
Yeah, it's super weird.
like I honestly can't fathom what I'm doing half the time, and uh, but like I'm like, oh yeah, this is pretty much what's left of Warhammer Fantasy, of course, barring Warhammer Fantasy roleplay. Uh, but it's trying to get the whole thing about it with, oh yeah, uh, I'm talking about Warhammer as a secondary job in a sense, and I'm just waiting for Old World so I can start doing bat reps, and
Yeah,
because
man.
that's something I really want to do. Like I'm pretty sure that you're going to dive into Old World as soon as possible too, aren't you?
I,
Because
I
like
I don't know. I don't know
rule,
why you would say that.
there's going to be loads of really cool shit, and like it's a weird thing because I'm still trying to like get my bearings of all this type of stuff. I'm just happy to be able to talk about the hobby and then talk about minis and just talk about bases and so on. Because like I've got these bases, these squares are from Green Stuff World, and they've got slots on the bottom, right? This is someone, a subscriber messaged me about these, and they're actually designed so you can put the magnets directly there, so you don't have to cut anything or anything.
Oh, that's
And
cool.
they're actually pretty good size. They do everything. Like I've got a chariot base here too, and everything. They're so good, like,
Nice.
and they're
Yeah,
cheap.
that is good.
They're really really cheap too,
Yeah,
and
the
like
age of the square is returning. It's
exactly.
coming back hard.
So I'm starting to like it's great because of this YouTube thing, I've been able to meet a lot of people like yourself, Baldy, and so on, and then I've been able to talk with loads of Warhammer Fantasy fans about really really obscure shit in the lore in the lore and stuff, and it's like, Christ, this is so cool.
Yeah, it's good times are being had, and it are strange times we live in, but wonderfully strange times.
Yeah, I mean, we wouldn't have this were it not for CA, of course, because like,
Absolutely. Yeah, undeniably so. There's no way the old world would be happening if it weren't for CA. Games Workshop would have never done that in a million years.
yeah. But let's go to you. Like, what got you started with the hobby?
And I've talked about this before. And my community kind of knows the story behind it, but uh, for me, my story revolves more around desperation, I think, on part of my parents. As far as when I was young, I was a bit of I was abnormal compared to my older brother. I had an older brother who was very stereotypical for my family in that he was very athletic, and like really enjoyed athletics. He was really big into baseball and football and all this stuff. American football, not soccer. But um, the thing for me is that my parents were very desperately looking for a hobby for me. Like, I had video games, but my parents did not consider that a hobby. And I had friends and stuff, but they were like, he needs to do something. And I just hated sports. I hated it
Mm,
so much with every fiber of my existence.
mm,
So, one day they were apparently going through a mall near here. It's called the Grapevine Mills Mall. It's still around, surprisingly. And back then there was a Games Workshop in
mm,
there. And as they were walking by it, they kind of looked and they saw that there were like people in there playing games and stuff, and they saw that they had the whole setup where like they had the display cases in the front of the glass window of the store so you could like see all the minis and stuff. And they were like, oh, that kind of looks interesting. So they went in and they learned a little about it, and they were like, yeah, I think our son would like this. He's kind of into like nerdy crap. So
mm,
they ended up bringing me I think the year was about it was about 2001, 2002, somewhere in that ballpark, and they ended up bringing me into the store to like just kind of get started. And so I don't even remember who the guy was, but I got to talk to one of the employees who was super nice and good at, you know, helping encourage, like, whoa, you know, what are you into? Like, what are your favorite fantasy creatures and all this stuff. And initially I was like, oh, you know, I love dragons and all this stuff. And he was like, oh, we got dragons. You want to, you know, you want to get a dragon and stuff to start? And excuse me, I need a drink of water, something fierce.
Yeah.
But the thing for me is that even unfortunately at that young age, I was a little prejudiced against elves. So when I saw that there were elves on the backs of the dragons, and he was kind of like, oh, well, you know, you can only really have like one of these, and it's kind of like a big piece. You know, maybe not like the best for a starter, but here's like some units for the guys that have dragons. And I was like, oh, I don't want this crap. I don't want a bunch of dudes. Um, and so he was like, well, if you like, how do you feel about dinosaurs? And I was like, oh, you know, I love dinosaurs. And he's like, well, here's like just an army of T-Rexes, and here's a T-Rex with another T-Rex riding it. And it was like, oh, I'm sold. So I picked up my first ever minis, which my very first set was a unit of Saurus Warriors, a 5th edition. So that was back when the Lizardmen were hideous.
Oh,
I,
the sickle, right?
yeah, the sickles back when they were green, and they had like really tiny heads compared to their bodies. Like I know some people are like, oh man, I'm so nostalgic for the old designs. I'm like, nah, dude. 5th edition Lizardmen were ugly. I hated them. They look terrible. So I picked up a unit of Saurus Warriors, their command squad, you know, the little metal minis. I got a single Croxagore and a Skink Priest. Was my starting set of minis. And slowly learned to paint and all that. I didn't play the game actually until 6 came out, which 6 was, I think either 6 had just started or it was right around the corner. Because I purchased the 6th edition book, which, you know, because the Lizardmen had not had their re-release yet, had all the old 6th edition minis in it. And I remember painting, and I started to learn to play with 6. But the thing is, when you're like a 10-year-old kid, is that Warhammer, especially back in those days, was way too complicated for a 10-year-old. So I had a friend who, I kind of had like a best friend back then who, whenever one of us got into a hobby, the other one would almost always get into the exact same hobby. So when he learned about it, he was like, oh, I want to get an army. So he got High Elves. He settled on High Elves as his army. Which should have been a warning sign to me all those years ago. But we started, so like me and him would just play each other constantly. We played the rules hilariously wrong until we learned there was a hobby store about like 50% closer than the mall was. And we started going there and learning to play the game. And it was like, well, now that we had adults helping us out, like they actually taught us the rules. And we would just hang out there. Like we would spend hours there every weekend, just like playing games or painting minis. Like I always hated painting. I was never great at it. I still am not a huge fan of it. And it's just because it was really hard not to be a perfectionist about it. You know, not to be like super upset when you make a little mistake, and also not understanding the 10-foot rule. I think actually no, it's the 3-foot rule. But where the idea, if you're painting minis for tabletop, unless you're trying to win a golden demon, if the model looks fine from 3 feet away, it's fine. just and like any of the parts you can't see when standing up, don't even have to paint those parts, like the underbelly and all that stuff. Just leave it. It's fine. And I didn't understand that for many years. So, but the new Lizardmen came out, and I loved the new Lizardmen. Like the new Lizardmen drop, we got the new big metal Stegodon, and they released like the new salamanders. I had one of the old salamanders where they had like the giant dorsal fin on their back. But the new Saurus were especially gorgeous. I'd never seen lizard creatures like that before, where they just had the really big head crests, which just looks super badass. And the Croxagores were better than the Croxagores from the prior edition. They still weren't great, but they were better. And they were still big old honking metal minis. And I started collecting, and in 6th edition, I really learned how to play the game. And I wasn't great yet, but 6th edition didn't have a super long life cycle. Like it had a long enough life cycle to make every army have an army book, but they used to come out much more quickly in those days. And also things were a lot cheaper in those days, where you just had black and white paperback army books that were $20. But started collecting, and when 7th edition hit is when I got really competitive. So I was a teenager at that point. I was 14 or 15, and 7th edition, like I was competitive in 6th, but 7th was when things really opened up for me. And although 7th had a lot of frustrating elements, the Demons of Chaos are beyond infamous for just being a completely broken ass book. It was a weird edition because even though the demons were super broken, they did this weird thing where every book that came after them was also super broken to try and like compensate. And one of the earliest books after the demons, I think the High Elves came out very quickly after that. So my buddy who played High Elves, who basically like always lost, started winning a lot all of a sudden, because he's like, oh, I've got Always Strike First, and Star Dragons are like freaking ridiculous and all this other stuff. And then the Lizardman book came out, and oh my god, the Lizardman book was so strong. Where they introduced that the Slaanesh Mage priests were just insanely strong, and you could purposefully miscast and give the miscast to somebody else. And miscasts in 7th edition were brutal. They got even more brutal in 8th. But like 7th edition was like the edition of Magic, because you could have an unlimited amount of power dice. It was just based on how many wizards you had. So that's where we had like Tzeentch and Vampire Count armies where they're like, oh, it's my Magic phase, here's my 20 power dice. But for me, Warhammer was where my imagination lived. I grew up, I would not say I was poor, but I was very low middle class in America. I grew up in a very, if you ever watch like King of the Hill, that's the kind of neighborhood I grew up in. King of the Hill is like an almost perfect representation of what it was like in suburban Texas. And for me, Warhammer was a very expensive hobby, but A, it was not nearly as expensive then as it is now. And B, the thing is that I would just get new stuff once in a blue moon. I would get a new army book when they came out. I didn't collect army books because I couldn't afford to. But what I would do is I would go into my local hobby store, and they would they always had like open copies of the books for reference. And I would just sit there for hours reading the books. So that was where I spent a lot of time, was at the mall or my local hobby store, just reading the books, because for me those were like my equivalent of my favorite storybooks, which is where I really fell in love with the lore. And I played the game a lot, and all of my the one best friend I had at the time played it. And then we've gotten kind of to middle school, I was that kid that would literally show up with an army book and just like be reading it in public. And people would walk and be like, what the fuck are you reading, dude? Like, what is this? What is this? And I'd be like, oh, it's a game that has like stories and stuff. So I was in my school, people didn't really bully you for being a nerd, but you could be a little ostracized. But I had really good friends, thankfully, so I was not as cast out as I otherwise would have been in a more stereotypical school. But my experience with Warhammer was very positive, and it helped me make a lot of friends. It helped me learn a lot. Warhammer, as far as I'm concerned, is excellent for young children or teenagers, as far as like learning reading comprehension, mathematics, getting a good idea for like geometry, understanding percentiles and all this stuff. Like really, really strong. And so it was a very critical thing for me. And it was really big in high school, because in high school is when I finally started to go to like GTs and stuff, because I could afford to with money I had from like my jobs, and I became very, very good at the game. And I wouldn't say I was the best Lizardman player in Texas, but I was pretty good. I could hold my own against some dirty armies, because I played dirty armies. Um, my favorite army was the classic like block of 36 Temple Guard with a Slan Mage Priest in it, Lore of Life, fully stacked. Like the Slan alone was worth like 800 points, but like killing him was virtually impossible. Um, and so you had all that stuff, and then the end times happened. But the end times for me was really complicated because I was in college at the time, and when I was in college, I was kind of moving all over the place. So like, I remember playing I didn't really play Warhammer in college because the first college I went to was like 6 hours away from my home, up in the Panhandle. So like I couldn't take my minis with me because I had no space for them in my dorm room, because my dorm room, the room I'm in right now, is about twice as big as my dorm room was, and there were two people in there. So did not have room for minis. My third year of college, when I had an apartment, I finally was able to have my minis with me, and that was roughly when the end time started, around 2013. And so I was super into the end times. Like, despite the fact I was not wealthy by any means, I still like would do anything I had to buy all the books, and read it, and I absolutely loved it and everything. And then all of a sudden it was like, oh, something's happening. Something's happening. What's happening? Like just the fact that Nagash came out was like such a massive deal, for anyone that was a big fan of the hobby, especially with the gorgeous mini that he had, where he was just colossal and really strong and stuff. But it was like, what are you doing, GW? I would say for me, because I didn't really have a local hobby store, because there was no Games Workshop in Amarillo, and I really didn't get to experience being around other hobbyists until roughly like Thankful came out when I was living in Fort Worth. Um, but the the crazy thing was that, unfortunately, I didn't really realize that everything was ending until about Thankful, because all the forums started getting rumor leaks that Warhammer was actually dying. And I remember I spent a ton of time on Lustria Online, which was the Lizardman forum, and everyone was talking about the end times. And when Warhammer died, that was heartbreaking. I mean, that was beyond heartbreaking. It was literally like losing like a family member or like a beloved pet or something, which is something that you were like really love. And like it like took my hate for 40k and like dialed it up to like a billion, because I was just so angry about it. Um, and when Age of Sigmar came out, I hated Age of Sigmar. Like I bought the opening books. Like I bought a collector's edition of the very first book they ever released. And I really did not like the direction they were going with the Stormcast Eternals, because it was painfully obvious that they were Space Marines.
Yeah.
Undeniably so. They were Space Marines. That's what Games Workshop wanted to sell them as. And I was like, I saw the rules where there were no points, and the rules were a joke. And I tried playing my Lizardmen, and it was super weird. I refused to get involved in the Realmgate Wars because I hated the Stormcast so much, and I hated the rules, and that there was no balance to the game whatsoever. Everything was just super wonky and dumb. And then they released the Seraphon book, where I found out that they turned all of my beloved Lizardmen into space demons. We had the actual demon keyword. We were celestial demons, and that I was like, nope, I'm done, fucking done. So I had nothing to do with it. But the thing that kind of kept me going was that rumors started coming out about Total War Warhammer, and when I found out about that, I was like, oh my god! And I started hanging out on the Total War forums, where I started what would end up becoming, at least at the time, the longest running thread ever in the history of the Total War forums, where I literally came on and was just like, hey, a lot of people are asking questions about Warhammer. I know a lot about Warhammer because I had started to collect all the army books and all the different Black Library books by that point. I was like, I can answer any questions you have, and I just started answering questions. I would just answer questions all day on the forum page, but eventually it got super unwieldy because someone would ask a question, and I even had like people helping me run it to try and be like, oh, okay, he already answered that question, but it's on page 42, and scroll down to like the eighth response, and that's the answer to your question. And so I was finally like, okay, I'll just start a YouTube channel. Like, I'll just figure out how to do this, start a YouTube channel because it'll just be better organized. And that's how Loremaster of Sotek started. And then when Total War Warhammer came out, I got super hardcore into it and did everything I could to be involved. And eventually attracted the notice of CA, which started that relationship. And the other thing was that before Total War Warhammer started, the hype was so high that I actually started teaching lessons on how to play Warhammer. So I found a website called Universal Battle because this was before TTS existed, or at least before I was aware of it. And Universal Battle was a far inferior tool, but it functioned, and I used it to teach people how to play Warhammer Fantasy. I was even paid by a decent amount of people how to play the game. So I taught them the rules. I taught them to play. I got good at playing it again. Of course, I taught 8th edition because I personally really enjoyed 8th. It wasn't perfect, but you know, we house ruled a couple things to make it like really fun. And like, you know, we made it where you couldn't double flee, or like you could, like, double fleeing wasn't allowed. And we messed around. We edited the rule for steadfast a little bit, where if someone like charged you in the flank and they had 2 ranks, it would negate steadfast and stuff like that. But it was super fun. And now it's my job and a hobby, so it's, you know, weird times. But yeah, so that's the background behind me and Nathan. I hope that's entertaining for anyone that maybe is new to our communities and just maybe doesn't know us or what have you. And I think with that, we are good to transition to the next segment, which I think will be fairly quick, but it's just kind of a fun thing to talk about, which is this week's Who Would Win? So for this week's Who Would Win, we're going to talk about a classic that I think I've heard a fair number of times. And I'm curious to hear Nathan's answer to it. I'm going to let Nathan go first. But for this week, we're doing... Whoa, you just unleashed the sun. You all right over there?
Oh, yeah, it's getting dark, but apparently it's because the other lighting isn't done. Screw it, I'll stay in the dark.
So, our Who Would Win matchup for today, and chat, feel free to throw your opinions in the chat rooms. Here, I'll even do a poll in mine while we're kind of discussing and getting into it. Who do you think would win between Aberash, the first of the Blood Dragons, and Tyrion, the defender of Ulthuan?
I've got a question though. Tyrion with Widowmaker or without?
Without. So classic Tyrion. So Tyrion with Sunfang, his like usual equipment.
Right.
We'll assume that Aberash has like magical armor and a magic weapon that like puts him in the same general ballpark. And we will also assume that he is on horseback. So he's got a nightmare steed.
Okay. And he's purified, yeah? He's already drunk.
Yes, this is post Dragon Blood.
Ooh, okay. That's gonna be quite a toughie, man. I mean, Aberash, post Dragon Blood, very competent fighter. No hindrance of any curse. And in general, I mean, he is like his life, well, unlife, has been based around going around the world and fighting. Whereas Tyrion, he's a good fighter, of course. He's got many thousands of years of plot armor.
Well, yeah.
But honestly, I'd say Aberash, because I think Aberash is pretty much he's actually, like, in lore, he's pretty much fought against like every single known race, hasn't he? At this point?
Yeah, Aberash has been around. Obviously, he's super duper old. He has fought a lot of different beasties, and he's fought most, if not all, races at some point in
Mm.
Warhammer Fantasy lore. So, but what do you think it is that would put Aberrash ahead? Like in your mind's eye, what is the situation that occurs in that battle that causes Aberrash to come out on top?
So I'm gonna have to say, given the fact that he's been constantly fighting and he's been moving around, he's been learning from different cultures as you go. It's very likely he's probably been to like cafe and stuff like that. He's been to areas which Tyrion might not have been to. It's very rare in lore for him to leave Orphan, isn't it? He's more as a I'm gonna stay here and I'll leave if I have to. In a sense, it's more to meet an immediate threat, isn't it?
Generally, just because he's so busy on Ulthuan as the defender of Ulthuan that there are
Yeah,
times he has left. He's been to Lustria and some other places. Um,
yeah,
he has traveled the world, but Tyrion is significantly younger than Aberrash.
yeah.
Tyrion's only like 500 years old, or no, more like I think he's like 350 or 400 years old.
Something like that. Yeah,
Aberrash is like at minimum like 3K, probably older.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah. I was thinking of a different elf when I said thousands. So I was thinking of, but either way, I'd say Abarash. Abarash, with the experience of years, with the experience of fighting different cultures, learning, because this guy is known to learn from what he fights. That's why a lot of uh, a lot of blood dragons are basically picked to be like the best of the best fighters throughout the world. I'd say Abarash is probably going to be best. If Tyrion had Widowmaker, I think it would be obviously Tyrion, but then again, then Tyrion would probably die at the end. It's a bit of a, I don't know.
All right, so you think that when it comes down to it, Aberrash's larger wealth of experience is what's going to be
Yeah,
like the damning factor.
I think so. Yeah.
All right, and I did a brief poll in my chat, and Aberrash did come out just by a little bit. I'm actually going to take the contrary opinion though. I think, in my opinion, I think Tyrion would come out on top.
Mm.
And I think for me, the biggest thing is that Tyrion, at the end of the day, is literally the reincarnation of an Aryan, right? So he is the reincarnation of like one of the greatest warriors the fantasy universe has ever seen.
Mm.
At the height of his power. And he has all his fancy equipment. He's got the dragon armor of an Aryan, which makes him immune to flames and very heavily protected. He's got Sunfang, which it cannot be understated the power of being able to like literally unleash full power dragon fire from your
Mm.
sword. And then he's also got that little pendant from Alario, which I think would actually be very, very key in his victory. And that for me, what it comes down to is that Aberrash, I will fully admit, has a disadvantage as far as I'm concerned, because we just don't know that much of what he keeps on him.
Mm.
Aberrash has always been kind of the character where he tends to fight with whatever he has at the time. He's not really noted for like keeping a specialist set of weapons on him. Rather, he's like a master of all. Um, to the extent that like he's genuinely a master at whatever weapon he picks up,
Yeah.
and it can wield it to deadly effectiveness. Um, and he is a vampire, not to mention a cured vampire. So like, there's not going to be any weird mistakes due to like madness or craziness.
Mm.
And he's also, we know that dragons or vampires that have been cured tend to be even mightier than their regular counterparts, and Aberrash is undeniably, when it comes to pure martial warfare,
Yeah.
the strongest of the vampires in martial combat, I should say, not necessarily warfare, but combat. Um, but I think even if you put them on opposing steeds, I do think Malhendir, Tyrion's mount, would absolutely be a point in his favor. I don't think there's any vampiric steed Aberrash could ever find that would allow him to go toe to toe with Malhendir. So that gives a point to Tyrion, in that he has a
Yeah.
mount that he's been with for its entire life, and it's like a legendary mount that's the descendant of like the king of horses or whatever. It's like, it's so strong that it has a much higher profile. And Aberrash, of course, a note for anyone that's wondering about it is Aberrash is not he's not a skilled wizard. Aberash barely understands magic, and it's debatable if he even knows how to use it in like any meaningful way, other than just kind of like naturally throwing it out around him. But he's not a wizard by any means of the imagination, which is why again, Games Workshop was always able to have this thing of like Vlad von Karstein is technically the strongest of the vampires because Vlad was a very powerful wizard in addition to being a very powerful warrior. Whereas being able to use magic is a big deal. But
Yeah.
and I do think that Aberash is definitely stronger than Tyrion. Like I think as their swords would be going at each other, Tyrion would be the one that'd be like Jesus Christ whenever their blades are slamming into one another. But Tyrion is also used to fighting foes that are significantly stronger than him. As far as like battling the likes of Nakari, the strongest keeper of secrets, or fighting mighty chaos champions, fighting the best Malekith has to offer, stuff like that. And I still think that at speed, I think they'd be even. If anything, I think Tyrion might even be a little faster. But I think ultimately what it comes down to is that Aberash is undeniably the most martially gifted of vampires, but I think being the most martially gifted of elves is a superior feat because vampires need to rely on that magic. And I think Aberash would be get through Sunfang and the dragon armor like fairly easily, but I think that heart would be a big thing because it'd basically be like fighting Vlad, where you have this epic contest of these two that are so evenly matched. Like I think we can both agree that Tyrion and Aberash are very, very much on the same skill level. Where Tyrion is such a mighty fighter that like even though Malekith can use magic, Malekith refuses to fight Tyrion because he doesn't want to risk getting his ass kicked by even when he has a dragon and he can cast magic. He's still scared of Tyrion, for good reason. And I think the big thing is that it comes down to I do think Aberash would be able to land a killing blow. Like they would be fighting, and Aberash would finally get that little edge on Tyrion and stab him, or tear out his throat or something. But then I think that Heart of Avalorn would pulse, and that moment of surprise when Tyrion comes back to life, it would be just like I think when he fought Urian Poisonblade, who was Malekith's like uber assassin that Malekith raised over like hundreds, if not thousands of years from infancy to be like the most powerful killer in existence. In that it was literally just a fraction of a second mistake that allowed Tyrion to kill Poisonblade. And I think that's what would happen to Aberash too. Is that if Tyrion impales Aberash with Sunfang and activates it to burn him from the inside from Dragonfire, he's dead. He's totally dead.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing for me is that Tyrion has a grace. Tyrion has like he has a game over. He has one extra life. Assuming the heart works, which from a lore standpoint it would definitely work. So Tyrion's got one gotcha. He's got one charge of Vlad's ring essentially. But I could totally see it either way. That's just how I personally imagine it.
Yeah, because you're talking about Aberash going in and it's a clean stab. There's obviously one thing that we know about vampires is that they lose their fucking cool. So what if it's not just a stab and it's literally going in, breaking armor and just, ripping into shreds?
Yeah, I mean that's an excellent question too. I think Aberash fighting style wise tends to be much more finesse and much less like berserker rampage. That's more of Ushoran's thing, right? Ushoran was literally like the hulking monster, literally, where Ushoran was this giant Vargolf on steroids who would literally just beat you into the dirt and rip you to pieces. Aberash, Aberash is literally so finessey and so skilled that when he fought Neferata, he literally impaled her with a lance perfectly so that the lance was like threading around her heart so that it didn't kill her, but it basically paralyzed her. Like that's how finessey he is, and I think that's how he would kill Tyrion. Is that he would go for the heart stab or the slice of the throat. Like maybe I don't know what the Heart of Avalorn would do in the case of a decapitation. But maybe it would like pulse fast enough to like seal his neck back together or something. But I think that's what it would come down to is how Aberash landed that killing blow. Because I do agree, I think Aberash would land the first killing blow. But I think Aberash is enough of a he's such a sword master, like he's such a paragon of dueling and like combat that I think he would go for a clean kill, not a super messy like I'm gonna rip your arms off kind of thing.
Do you have characters that lose their cool and they're known for clean kills and so on? Like for example, Sigvald when he basically goes for Krell and like
Yeah, punches him to death.
yeah, like we don't generally hear that type of stuff, especially because obviously that's his hands are like they get deformed because of it and so on. So a character can easily lose his cool. We've seen that with, like, let's be honest, a lot of Nagash's losses are because of him losing his cool and just being typical. Oh, and I'm going to monologue now because that's what we do. Because that's what happened to him in Alcatizar and so on.
Yeah, same thing with
And
Neferata. Neferata is another character that like she'll lose because she gets riled up.
exactly. And I think that maybe if the fight happens for too long, he would lose his cool and just go unleash the beast type of thing.
It's certainly possible, and like and you know it comes down to once more is we just don't have enough information on what Aberash has been up to, in like literally the thousands of years since we last saw him. I mean, Aberash killed the red dragon like like 2,000 years before the modern day, and supposedly he's been living like a monastic existence ever since then, like basically just being a monk on a mountain. So but and that's the thing is I think it would come down to what extent was his vampirism cured, right? Like did drinking the dragon blood and meditating on a mountain or whatever the hell he's been doing since we last saw him, like is he just like super at peace with himself and is kind of that stereotype of like the master swordsman that is like almost ethereal because he's so in control and calm and collected? Or is it that he still has that monster inside, you know? Because the only other vampire we know of who has drank dragon blood and is still around is Zacharias. And Zacharias is still like a bastard. But Zacharias has always been a bastard, whereas Aberash in life and much of his undeath was much more centered than a lot. But but like I said, I think this is actually a really fun matchup because it literally, I really could see it going either way. As far as like maybe even like because it comes down to maybe Aberash is just so well trained and so well honed that even if Tyrion came back to life and lunged at him, Aberash would be able to deal with it. Because who knows? He's fought some crazy shit before.
Yeah.
And maybe he lives by the double tap rule after fighting so many other things where he's like, no, we really make sure this thing's dead. But I would love to see in the comment section because I'm of course gonna upload this to YouTube and put it on podcast sites and stuff. If you're listening to this episode either in the comment section or hey, add us on Twitter, at me and Nathan. Let us know, based on what we've discussed, who do you think you would win? I would love to see your responses.
It would be very curious, honestly. It would.
Also, please, for the love of God, give us suggestions. I'll say now, I will be collecting suggestions. I'm going to open up a place on my Discord that'll just be for suggestions on matchups. And also, you can put them below the videos. You can tweet them at us. But, like, help us. Give us ideas for matchups. We want to know which I want to hear about. All right. I think that's you feel good about that? Any other thoughts?
I feel good.
All right. So there's one last thing on the agenda for today that we're going to talk about, and that's orcs, or more accurately, Orruks. So we're going to have a discussion about AOS today. Like probably almost every episode. And today we're going to talk about how Orruks have evolved in Age of Sigmar, because as we all know, they're no longer just classic fantasy orcs. Classic fantasy orcs existed in a single state, in that they were large simian-shaped brutes, and by simian we mean that they're built like gorillas, right? They had huge upper bodies, really like jutting tusks and fangs, really little legs. And they had hulking shoulders, and their arms would like almost be dragged, like their knuckles would drag the ground because their arms were like so oversized almost. really big, fat, flat foreheads, and that was the only way they existed. It was just a matter of cultural difference in that savage orcs had like tribal paintings all over them and refused to work with anything more sophisticated than wood and bone and stone. And then you had classic, yeah, and then you had classic orcs, which would basically just loot whatever, and are traditionally like leather hide, but built like chariots, built, you know, helped rule over catapults because they would be the orc bullies, making sure the goblins behaved. And you had like error boys and stuff, so they were like kind of approaching a lot of things in life. They would just do whatever worked. And then of course we had black orcs, which were just the ultimate chaos dwarf evolution of the orc, to just be even bigger and hulkier and meaner, but they were purely hyper focused on combat and wearing the heaviest armor possible. And that's all they cared about was combat. Like they're so hyper focused that other orcs find them boring, and they find other orcs to be idiots who are like super annoying because they're too easily distracted. So that's what we started with. Now we're in the Age of Sigmar, where there are still 3 variants of orcs, but now they're drastically different. So we have savage orcs, which have evolved into being known as bone splitters. And bone splitters are the classic design. However, their culture is significantly different in that not only do they kind of eschew technology, but they are monster hunters. They specialize purely in the thrill of the hunt and going after the biggest, baddest monsters they can find, and literally like carrying around Gork's teeth spears and like throwing spears that are so big it takes 2 orcs just to carry them. They got all these crazy shamans, and their whole thing is hunting down and harvesting monsters. Then we have the Iron Jaws, which are the evolution of the Black Orc. And it's a pure faction where the orcs are even bigger and even hulkier. And they're all about just being dead hard. They're just dead hard. And wear the thickest plate they can possibly think of. They ride wyverns, but the wyverns like went through massive steroid treatment, and they're thick with 3 C's. And then, most interestingly, they introduced the Cruel Boys. The Cruel Boys, of course, being the most recent development, which are Swamp Orcs. And the Swamp Orc Cruel Boys are a very different design, where they still have the classic orc design of smaller lower bodies, smaller legs, but they're much lankier, and they're almost creepy looking in that they're a lot of people have compared their designs to many of the orcs we saw in the Lord of the Rings films, or especially the Hobbit films, where they kind of have a more stereotypically evil appearance, in that they have almost goblinoid features, in that they have very pinched features, and they just look like they're always scheming or conniving, and like you really wouldn't want to see one or have one smile at you because it's going to be bad. And they're cruel. They're orcs that fight dirty. They're orcs that use poison. They use toxins. They torture people. They torture monsters into obeying them. They're big about capturing monsters and chaining them up and forcing them to serve them. They're cunning. Yes, exactly. They are the Mork. So they're the first, in Warhammer Fantasy, I think it would be argued that orcs were Gork, goblins were Mork. Age of Sigmar instead said, no, all orcs are Gork and Mork, but now we've got Savage Orcs, which are Gorka Morka, which are the combined element. We've got Iron Jaws, which are pure Gork, so they're brutal but cunning. And then now we've got Mork's Boys, which are the Cruel Boys, which are cunning but brutal. And it's a fascinating evolution. Like, they use giant range weapons. They got their Manskewer boltas, where they're these giant, huge crossbows that actually do a ton of mortal wounds and super duper nasty. They ride giant vulture monsters that are like called kilobeaks and all this stuff. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. So Nathan, what are your thoughts as far as like how the orcs have evolved and where we've come from, of just having the classic trio of Black Orc being a single unit type, essentially, regular orcs, which were kind of the more inventive and classic, and then Savage Orcs, to now Bone Splitters being an entire faction and culture. Iron Jaws being black orcs evolved into an entire faction of culture, and Cruel Boys, which I guess some people could argue are similar to more of the classic orcs, where they're very inventive and willing to create things.
So, interestingly enough, the Cruel Boys are not an original design. There used to be a miniature which had the same shield type and everything. A few miniatures way back in the day, I believe the fourth edition running. I've actually got one somewhere. It's red, but it's an old style. So the Cruel Boys themselves are a reimagining of an old orc, which is actually really, really amazing because I'm part of a few old Hammer groups, and I mean seriously old Hammer, and a lot of people saw that as a really, really good thing because it was bringing back an old style but just to an updated standard. I personally, as a fan of orcs in general, the Cruel Boys really look good, and they give me that feeling, like you said, it's more right. It's cunning but brutal, and it's something that we always needed in representation of orcs. Because I mean, if we look at the if we look at, like, say for example in Warhammer Fantasy aspect, like the forest goblins, they worship the spider. There's Gork and Mork, but they worship the spider. And we already had that inclination of the bad mood for the just very lightly hinted. Whereas when it comes to orcs, we had two gods, but it was never really established because it was always, is it of Gork or Mork? And it was always just that, it was a silly joke, let's be honest, when they could have given that thing where I would have seen it as this. I would have seen it in by Warhammer Fantasy standards, I would have seen Gork to be the old school orcs, like the boys, just the basic boys and so on and so forth. Then I would have seen the Cruel Boys, or whatever they would have been called in earlier editions, as Mork. Then the Black Orcs as the perfect molding of both. And then obviously then there's the Savage Orcs, which are kind of like the slow cousins. There would be like that, you would have like a little bit of a triangle which links all types of orcs, and I think we finally got that with Age of Sigmar. I personally really like the minis. I think it's really cool that they're stylistically different. I personally like the more updated Lord of the Rings-esque style, because yeah, I mean, it really. I was looking at the what was it, the Azog mini from the Battle of Five Armies, and I was like, "Fuck me, that's just literally a."
Azog is literally the spitting image of a Cruel Boy.
Yeah, I like it. I honestly think that the design is cool. The fact that this army has a lot of range, it's so drastically different. It really gives you that feel of they're trying to finally expand the lore and just give it its own identity, which is desperately needed. I think third edition is now pushing, mid second going on to third now, was pushing heavily on identity for Age of Sigmar. So now we're getting new shit, and everything's just like coming out, and it's getting lore, and it's different, but it's the same. It's how, like, for example, the Lumineth were promoted as pointy elves, and so on. Like, I like these orcs, and I don't like upfront getting in your face, because upfront in your face gets you killed. I like being
Yeah.
I like being from the back, shooting a fucking massive bolt thrower right into someone's face, because I know that I'm safe, but I'm taking that bastard down from like 50 yards away.
Yeah, and I think you struck on an excellent point earlier, where I think in fantasy, it could honestly be argued that just Mork really doesn't have a place in fantasy. As far as like a genuine, like the closest thing you could probably say is a genuine representation are like just regular goblins. Because you're right in that for night goblins, it's the Bad Moon. Even though they heavily insinuate that it's like a representation of Gork and Mork, and therefore it's Mork. And that like Skarsnik was heavily implied to be the avatar of Mork during the end times, but it just didn't really feel right. In that like Gork and Mork are both orcs, like they're orc gods primarily. And that while the goblins respect Gork and Mork, and the goblins in particular Mork, it did always feel like there was this weird disconnect. And we really saw them really go ham with that when they introduced the Gloomspite Gits. They literally got rid of Mork's association with the goblins, where they said, no, the Bad Moon is now a god and is worshipped as a god, even though it is, in a sense, all of the destruction gods are essentially a facet of Gorka Morka or related to him in some way. They were like, yeah, no, the Gloomspite Gits have the Bad Moon, and they all worship the Bad Moon. And that, but they worship it in different ways, where the night goblins worship it as literally just the Bad Moon, as an actual moon, and the spider fang grots, which are the forest goblins, worship it as a giant spider egg, which is the most terrifying thing in imagination, because they think it's a egg laid by the spider god. And Mork now has finally stepped into having his own faction, being the Cruel Boys. Which, and the thing that's funny is I think one thing that you said that I really agree with is I do think that morkiness was represented in the orcs in fantasy, just not as well. Because I would argue heavily, and I think we kind of see this in how they're acting, in that whenever orcs would act with tactics, that was morkiness. And so there were kind of Mork special characters, but the Mork special characters, honestly, the morkiest character was Gorbad Ironclaw. Gorbad's whole thing was he wasn't really that big of an orc. He was not an especially like he could fight and he could hold his own, but his thing was that he was smart and that he actually understood how to use tactics. You could say that Gorfang Rotgut was very morky in that he had an understanding of economics of all things. It was like really big on tactics and like stealth missions. He was very clever and preferred to build up an empire of wealth as opposed to just smashing things. Azhag could be argued is very morky when Nagash was, even though that was mostly Nagash, and that he used tactics and cleverness in order to be a threat. Whereas, honestly, the only really gorky orc character was Grimgor. Grimgor Ironhide just being like a big basha. And, he's always been the incarnate of Gork, and that was super obvious. But I agree immensely that the Cruel Boys really just feel like a natural evolution of the likes of Azhag and Gorbad, where we have these, and even their special character, the new special character, the Mouth of Mork. So you have the Fist of Gork, which is Gordrak, who is literally just Grimgor Ironhide on a wyvern on cocaine. Copious amounts of cocaine and steroids. Now we have the Mouth of Mork, who is in functionality in a lot of ways just Azhag, but fully taken into the shaman angle, as opposed to an orc warlord that also happens to be able to cast magic because of a spirit, being Nagash. And he's this super clever, and he's an anti-mage mage, which is super fun. For anyone that hasn't looked at this guy's lore, he's amazing. He rides on this giant vulture monster, and he literally has an ability called Mork Says No, where he just stops you. He's horrifying. He literally has a special role where if he ever stops you from miscasting, he fills your guts with tapeworm squigs that start eating you from the inside out. Good lord. Terrifying ability. So if you ever try and cast, if this guy dispels you, you take a mortal wound, and if he gets a 10 or higher when trying to dispel you, he does D3 mortal wounds, which is brutal. So he can, he's genuinely terrifying to go up against with wizards, which is such a cool idea. And that you have these guys that are playing dirty and playing smart. And I agree absolutely with Nathan that it really feels like a very natural evolution of what the orcs really should have been, and finally giving them variety just beyond, not to throw shade at 40k, but 40k's orcs are all the same. It's just a difference of culture, I guess, or like how they kill things is all that's different about them. You know, whether they're like, we kill with squigs, we kill with guns, we kill with mechs, whatever, but they're just all orcs. The greenskins in 40k are very boring and very basic, other than they're just funny. Like, they're funny, I'll give them that, they're very funny, but that's all they've got going for them. Whereas now fantasy greenskins are fascinating and have so many different cultures between all of the goblins, the forest goblins, the night goblins, the likely upcoming Get Mob Grots, which are like the regular goblins with giant wolves and stuff. All the trolls, like Troggoths, have their own culture now, and there's a lot of different kinds. And now we've got 3 very distinct types of orcs, which is just, or Orruks, which are fascinating. But I think the big thing the last big question we're going to end on that I'm really curious for Nathan's opinion is, how do you feel about the theory, because it is a theory going around the community, that Cruel Boys, Ironjaws probably won't, but how do you feel about the idea that Cruel Boys will be playable in Warhammer the Old World?
On squares.
Put on squares. Do it. Do it. Fucking do it.
Second, getting one of those spam bots attacking my chat.
Oh, those are fun.
Delete.
Because the thing about the Cruel Boys, for anyone kind of listening, is that honestly, bar a few very narrow elements, they could very, very easily manifest within Warhammer Fantasy as just orcs from, like, we've heard rumors that half orcs are coming to, or no, not rumors, we've had it confirmed that half orcs, which are a very, very old school unit from very, very early, like 3rd edition. Like, I think half orcs were written out of the setting by like 4th edition. Like, they were gone already by then. Half orcs are returning, and I honestly think that the Cruel Boys are going to be the half orcs.
Think that could work. I mean, I've got a few of the guys on squares because I wanted to test it. I can't remember what exactly, so let me just check. There should have. Must be. I think they're in the other room because we've got a bunch of.
Well, they're scaled for like 25 mil, right? The same as regular orcs.
Yeah, they fit on the 25 mil bases, no problem. The ones with the big crossbows, they fit on the chariot base, not a chariot base.
Oh, the war machines, like the man skewers.
Yeah, they fit on one of the specific war machine bases.
Or I think it's the beast skewer. Is the big
yes.
one. Yeah,
yes.
So for anyone confused, the beast skewer is like a bolt thrower. It's not like a crossbow. It's like a big old honking bolt thrower. Whereas the man skewers are bolt throwers, like held by an individual orc.
And the man skewers, I believe,
the man skewers should be 25 mil.
Yeah, 25 by 50 chariot. Cavalry base.
Oh, really? Oh, that makes sense because they are pretty large.
So those were I've been checking them out because a lot of people have been getting the models and so on, and we've all been chatting, and it's like this is incredible because like I would love for these minis to be usable in Old World. I would absolutely love them. We desperately need an orc update. Like, even the savage orcs are a little dated. They look good. But like,
yeah, Skaven first. Skaven, Beastmen, please. Let's get those guys updated first. But yeah, and I could definitely see savage orcs receiving a lot of love when they update the greenskins for Warhammer Fantasy.
it would be if we got like these guys. I love them. Like, I'm gonna pull up the Games Workshop site now for them. Oh God, that was loud.
We could not hear it on this end. If it makes you feel better.
Sorry, someone just threw a donation. Thank you, Ryan. You scared the crap out of me. I thought I had that muted. Sorry. Oh God. I have this thing where I keep forgetting that the setting is really loud, so I'm practically death at the moment. But yeah, so I'm looking at the models now, right? And, it's like there's so many cool things about these crawl boys. It's just they could fit with the theme so well. I mean, I'm looking at those the swarm caller shamans, right? How fucking cool are they, man? Like, I look at those models and I think, damn, it's just so cool, you know?
Oh yeah, and I think the thing to say for anyone that's kind of like oh how they the biggest thing is I'm hoping, and I think a lot of people are hoping, that models that make sense will make the journey to be viable in the old world. You know, where it's like I could see orcs with bolt throwers, I could see orcs, I could see the swamp kala shamans, I could see all these guys. Now, will like the killabeaks be in, like the giant vulture monsters? Probably not. Or like the weird or like none of the special characters obviously are going to make that journey. They're going to stay in AOS. But there is a lot of potential to use AOS where appropriate to expand these factions. I mean, I don't think anybody would argue that any of the mortal units that have been introduced, or new demons that have been introduced in AOS, would not fit perfectly in fantasy. Where it's like there's no reason Slaanesh couldn't have Blissbarb archers, or Mirmadesh praying bringers, or Nurgle couldn't have putrid blight kings, or Pusgoyle Pusgoyle knights, or whatever they're called. Or why Khorne can't have Skull Reapers and Blood Warriors, and Tzeentch can't have Zongors and whatever the hell his little dudes are called. So you know, paying attention to AOS, and I know Nathan has been doing this quite a bit, paying attention to can they fit on square models. And if the answer is yes, I don't think that's a coincidence a lot of the time.
It comes to the point, like, for example, the Fiendbloods, right? They fit on 40s, they fit on 50s, they look very good on 40s. I've been doing this a lot when I get because I've been doing a theme army project, so I've been actually picking up from all 4 Chaos Gods and doing my ultimate Warhammer Fantasy armies for each of the gods. So if I look at the Chaos faction from Khorne, I've been using Blades of Khorne. There we go. I've actually been using Blood Warriors. I've been using Blood Warriors as Chaos Warriors of Khorne, and what I've done is I've just had to remove one arm of one guy to just give him a horn so I can have a musician. Because you've got a champion, you've got a banner bearer. You know, that's another thing that's important to note. A lot of stuff coming out recently has a full command. Like the Hobgrots has full command.
Yeah, they've been very busy being like, because there was a bit in Age of Sigmar where they stopped doing that. They stopped releasing full commands, but recently they've been going ham on being like, hey, here's your battle standard bearer, here's your standard bearer musician and champion for every unit, which they were not doing consistently through second edition. But as we got into late second edition and now third edition, they're going ham on musicians and standard bearers.
Like, it is insane. I remember, I think I was talking to, I don't know who I was talking to, but I was looking at the Grots. I was like, it's a banner, champion, musician. This, like, it seems to, like the stars are aligning, and like someone, there was another YouTuber, I can't remember who it was, but he's like, "Oh, you're thinking too much into this." It's like, of course I'm thinking too much into this because holy crap! Like, we haven't had hobgoblin models in fucking eons.
Yeah, the Hobgrots are pretty special. And I'm really curious what GW is going to do with the Chaos Dwarfs. Like, we know that's on the horizon.
Oh yeah. There's been so many mentions.
Yeah, but that's a conversation for another day. Chat, I'd like to kind of open the floor here, right here at the end, for any like immediate questions, or that someone from either chat may have, as we're kind of wrapping up here. We're over time, but that's fine. So just a few minutes to try and catch any kind of relevant, I should say, discussions I mean, as long as it's Warhammer or Total War or AOS or something related.
Think about cooking lasagnas. So whilst we wait, I've been looking at using because I've got it here because I've been building them up. You know the peacock character from the Glutos kit, right?
Yeah,
The one that goes like that with like the feathers around. I'm thinking of using that as a BSB, to be honest.
I think that would make an excellent battle standard bear.
I mean, she's pretty, isn't she?
Okay, so I've got a couple questions that have come in here. So one question is, do we think that the old world tabletop game would be a way for Creative Assembly to add Age of Sigmar units to Total War if they are used in the old world?
Discussed this in a video in the past. I actually said, well, if it gets added into Old World, technically it's part of the canon, and I wouldn't be opposed to it. I think a lot of people would be very happy for that. I would if they decide, like, oh yeah, the Hedonites are coming to the Old World, which means they could be usable in Warhammer 3 as a DLC, just putting it out there. Um, just
Yeah.
in case anyone's listening.
I personally am of the opinion that it's certainly possible. I don't think we're going to see. I don't think Creative Assembly is going to bring in any units that were not part of Eighth Edition, or like End Times, or like existed in the lore or White Dwarf magazines. I think they may kind of pull some like funnies, like they did with the Armored Squig Riders, where they may kind of try and slide in some AOS units, but not call them by their technical name. Or, but I don't think you're going to see like full on bringing new factions or new units. Like I don't think you'd see like the likes of Blitzbarb Archers showing up, or the likes of Skull Reapers of Corn. There is a chance, though. I mean, one of the things that I think I've discussed a fair bit is that I don't know what they could honestly do with DLCs for the Mono God factions based on the Corn roster, because the Corn
Yeah.
roster is literally just done. Like,
Yeah.
it's missing some special characters, but that's it. However, if they decided to do a DLC where they did say, hey, here are Blood Warriors, here are Skull Reapers, like things that showed up in the End Times or things that could justifiably show up in fantasy, then yeah, you can make a DLC like that. But I do think that for them it's kind of like a weird stance, because I think I can see what Games Workshop is thinking behind the gears in their head of why let them do that now when they can just keep Total War Warhammer about like 8th edition era, and then after they do some other games they can then release another video game that's Warhammer the Old World, where then they bring out all these toys. But it also, to be frank, Warhammer the Old World is not gonna beat Total War Warhammer 3. Total War Warhammer 3 is gonna be out way before the old. Like I would be shocked if Warhammer the Old World drops any purchasable minis next year. And Total War Warhammer 3 at worst case scenario is gonna come out in like March of next year. And Total War Warhammer 3 is probably gonna have a life cycle of somewhere in the ballpark to like 2 to 4 years. So like the old world is probably gonna still be in its infancy by that point. So I would not look to the old world for content for Total War. I think it's going to be the other way around.
The kind of seen it like this. Like, if they do an old world thing, it should just be like a standalone expansion in a very similar vein to was it Fallen Samurai for Shogun 2? Because if GW and CA want to start printing money, I don't think Old World would do it unless it's a standalone. Because if they want to start printing money, it needs to be Total War Warhammer 40k.
Yeah, and that's something that like seems literally guaranteed, is that once Total War Warhammer 3 dies down, or like while it's in its DLC cycle, some historical game's going to come out. Historical game hopefully will be a big success, and then after that, it'll be time for space and lasers.
God, I hope it's for free next. I'll cry if it's.
But as I said, I think it's distinctly possible, and there's certainly an argument for it. But I wouldn't bet on it for AOS stuff. What would I? Is there anything we would like to see for the Bone Splitters? That is like not a thing yet.
Warhammer Fantasy version of a Squiggoth. A big.
Oh, that would be cool. Just like just a giant monster covered in orcs, savage orcs that they caught. That would be super cool. I would love to see a giant monster covered in that for like monster hunting that's covered in bone splitters. That and for me, I want a special character for them. I want a new Wargog shaman who's like the ultimate beast hunter leader. Because they don't have a special character right now because they turned Wurzag into a generic shaman.
I've got an interesting question. Yeah, you don't think GW doing old world stuff again? They look into other parts of history, like we'll get a look at the War of Vengeance or the First Invasion, maybe as a supplement.
Yeah, I think that depends on how it goes down. If they release the old world and it's like a just amazing success, then I could see them, because it depends right on what they're gonna do. Is Warhammer the old world gonna be like, we release these starter factions in the Great War Against Chaos and then we expand globally, so like we're still watching what's going on in that same time frame, but we're adding in the High Elves and the Dark Elves and the Lizardmen and the Skaven and all these factions that may not be playable at launch, or may not have books at launch and new minis? Or are they going to do Warhammer the Old World where it's just the Old World and those factions that are participating, and then maybe they do other time periods where it's like, okay, we're done with the Old World and the Great War Against Chaos, now let's go do the War of Vengeance between the High Elves and the Dwarves, now let's go do the Sundering, now let's go do the Great Cataclysm in Lustria, or like the War of the Rat and the Serpent. There's a lot of different ways they could do that. And I mean, I think for me personally, I would prefer starting in the age of the Great War Against Chaos, expanding it to be the entire globe, and then advancing the storyline to get us to see where it takes us. We know we're going to end in the end times eventually, but like there's 200 years between those 2 points, worth exploring. And if they wanted to release a supplement, people would buy it, but those would probably be good like standalone boxes, like a $200-300 box set that comes with unique special characters and models that have unique designs and a rule book that's like, here's how you play, because most of those wars only include 2 factions. That's the problem. The Age of Vengeance is elves versus dwarves, period. The Sundering, High Elves versus Dark Elves, period. Like, they're just not that exciting except for 2 guys, which that's not a really good foundation for like a large setting.
Yeah. So I think it's going to be global. We've already seen hints at other factions that weren't really too involved. Like, for example, they were involved, but not so much. Like, when they were doing the Bretonia focus, we already had High Elf icons showing up on the right-hand side. So we know High Elves are pretty much in, even though they haven't acknowledged it. And then recently, obviously, with when they did the map new, they showed off the Wood Elf icon in Alpha Lauren and in the one that's in Midland, which I keep forgetting its name.
Lorelorn.
Yeah. So obviously, we know that we're going to start getting some more. The Wood Elves themselves weren't too involved when it came to the thing, but we could have imagined that they would have been, because obviously there's always Beastmen in the draft world, which would have caused a lot of issues.
Yeah, and that's the big thing, is that, and this is something I've been telling people about. I wouldn't say warning about, but like trying to like level with people, is that the Great War Against Chaos we're heading into from Warhammer the Old World is not going to be the same one from OG Fantasy. It's going to be vastly expanded, and because it's being expanded, it's going to be heavily retconned. Where, like, in the original one, there were 3 High Elves in the entire war. There was There was Teclis and his 2 Archmage buddies, and one of them dies, and that's it. I mean, that's already been retconned in, like, if you play Chaos Bane, the recent action RPG adventure game. That's like Diablo, but Warhammer. That game features another High Elf mage who was not part of the original 3, which is a shame. That would have been cool. I would have liked if they had used one of them. But you know, that's what they. I would highly expect that Games Workshop is going to have it, where the High Elves have armies, not just Teclis and his buddies, and that the Wood Elves are going to do something, which they did not originally, and that the Bretonnians are going to do something, which they really didn't originally, because they were all just kind of busy dealing with their own crap. You know, the Tomb Kings are going to be up to something. Like, a lot of people are going to be busy. And I think that it's going to be very exciting, but it's also like, you know, like Loremaster job, like what I do, isn't going anywhere, because the timeline that I research and study is not going to be the same timeline we're going into.
Yeah, we're going to be going into so many changes. It's kind of like what happens to the Horus Heresy, where so much lore has changed. A lot of us who like sit down, analyze lore changes, and so on, it's kind of like starting again, in a sense.
Yeah, basically.
Shit, this has changed. It's like early on into the time of Free Emperors, doesn't Cetra go off in a hissy fit against the Norskans?
Yeah, and honestly, I still kind of expect that to happen. I think it's right before the Great War against Chaos. It's like right before the war starts, Cetra invades Norska, which would be awesome and would be a great way to introduce him. Of just be like, hey, there are Tomb Kings in Norska. Like, that would be really hype. But like Kislev's empire is huge. Like they've already changed some of the lore where like Kislev's empire is much larger than it was at that time period. Where in Warhammer the Old World, Kislev has held on to all of the territory east of Peak or High Pass. So through Zorn Uzkul all the way up to the Eastern Steppes, which in their original lore they did not control that territory. So like that's already changed significantly.
That's what I found weird, because obviously early on in the lore, they were fleeing from the east because obviously they knew of the coming darkness and so on. They had Mister basically saying, "Yeah, go west," in a very weird way. But this new Kislev, and this is actually that Kislev, the new Kislev that we've recently seen in that Old World post. I think that that's the Kislev we're going to see in 1-3.
Yeah, I agree. For better or worse. Which
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of the spooky thing. Like, we don't know if the Ancient Widow is still canon. I hope she's still canon.
Yeah.
She's a really cool character. We don't know if like playable hags are still going to be a thing. Like with the Babas and all that. And that's, you know, that's the spooky part, is that we're going into an age of change, and change is always scary.
I like the idea of an expansion to Kislev, because let's be honest, there's like 4 provinces with a total of 12 actual settlements. If that was just Kislev alone, that would be kind of depressing.
Well, and based on the trailer for Total Warhammer 3, it seems highly likely that at least in the Game 3 standalone, I don't think Katarin's going to be anywhere near Kislev. Katarin's like way out east doing shit. I think that maybe what's his face, Rasputin, will start in. I think he's going to start near Kislev. I actually don't think. Oh my gosh, what just happened? Uh-oh. Uh-oh. You good? You back?
Well, you froze.
Yeah, you also froze.
Weird. Yeah, so you were at, I think, at the trailer for Total War 1-3, and then it froze.
Okay, so what I was saying is that in the trailer, Katarin appears to be very far away from Kislev, and her faction is even called like the something expedition. Like she's not Kislev the faction. She is a expedition that has left Kislev and is doing something else. Which I do think is going to be the case, at least in Total Warhammer 3. But I don't know. We'll have to see. I mean, we're almost to September. Almost time for Cathay. It's almost time. Very excited. I'm scared, but I'm also excited.
Scared. I am very, very scared because law changes. Look, I'll be very, very honest, right? I'm scared they're going to make Cafe a Mary Sue faction.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think for me, the thing I'm big scared about is that, like, the thing that was so amazing about the Warhammer of the past is that they were almost brutally not caring about just like finding really cool historical and mythological shit from whatever the culture they were stealing from was based on, and just being like, let's just make it into something different, but like you could still see the reference
Yeah.
and go with it. And I almost worry about them like being worried about like offending like being a little too, I don't want them to worry too much about like, oh, we need to be like super careful and make sure we don't like Warhammerify it too much. It's like, nah, Warhammerify the shit out of it. You know. But we'll have to see what happens.
Get real Warhammer. Like this is my idea is like, damn man, like we're finally getting Cafe. This is a dream for hobbyists for like years, right? And like, don't make them Mary Sue good guys, because Cafe was always established to be like a good faction, but leaning towards the morally grey. It's what made them so impressive.
Yeah, they definitely had shenanigans, and I don't think I genuinely do not think they're gonna make Cathay just like plain good guys, because they've done a good job of like all the order factions in the game like still have that flavor of they are order, but they're not necessarily like great. Like the Empire has a lot of problems. The dwarves have problems. The elves have problems. We've seen already that Kislev has a lot going on. Has got some serious issues and demons in their closet, and I think that we're gonna see the exact same thing with Cathay.
I mean, I hope so. And if Cafe works really well, man, like there's potential in the future for like Ind, Nippon, uh, Kuresh, maybe like
Yeah,
all this stuff, and I hope this freaking works because as this is not me being a Total War fan. This is me being a Warhammer Fantasy fan. I want it all. I want it
no,
all.
I'm in the same boat. Like I want this game to explode and for them to go, oh wow, people really like these new human factions. What if we did End? And then for End to explode and them go, okay, what if we keep going and like let's be crazy and try Nippon. Oh wow, people really like that. Here's Koresh. Oh, people really like that. All right, here's your Southern Realms expedition. Oh wow, people really like that. Like, just fill out the planet.
Exactly. Give us everything. Because first off, we will buy it, right? Like the fan base, they cannibalize these DLCs, yeah? They want more content because obviously they're obsessed with it. You've seen this. Did you go on Steam DB?
Yeah, this shit's crazy.
It's insane how high the numbers are for Warhammer 2, considering that the game is, what, 4 years old now and the end of its lifespan, and still so many people playing every single day. It's like, just keep milking the freaking game. Milk it.
Yeah, please. And, I would love to see them just go complete ham with it too. Like now that Mercenaries introduced, like really allow us to see more of that stuff. Like I know a lot of people would really love to see humans from other cultures, especially like not super white cultures. Like,
Mhm.
okay, can we make the Amazons a full playable race? Well, no, probably not. But could we like introduce Amazons as units that are like mercenaries you can get from like Amazon Island or something? Yeah, that'd be awesome. Get us some like super beastly dark skinned women and just let them like just snooze like just spear people to death. Great, I'm on. Let us see like interpretations of like Zulu tribesmen if you're in the Southlands, stuff like that. That would be
But
cool.
I'm never going to stop talking about that. Araby.
Yeah,
He's dead.
Araby. Yeah, Araby. I may be a fool, but I still genuinely believe Araby has a place waiting for them at the golden table of the Southern Realms playability.
I
But
hope so.
I think that would be a good stopping point for the day.
Yeah.
I think I guess I should in the future just assume that we're a 3-hour podcast instead of a 2-hour podcast because that's what we did. But hopefully everyone had fun and enjoyed the discussions. Um, This was the second episode of Lorebeards. We'll be continuing to do this. We are off for this upcoming Sunday, so there will be no Lorebeards this Sunday, but there will be Lorebeards next Sunday, I think.
We'd have to push it. We'd have to make it a bit earlier, a bit after, because I'm in a metal festival. I'm actually getting my first concert in 2 years.
We'll let you know when the next episode of Lorebeards is. We'll figure it out, but it's definitely not this Sunday. It'll be sometime next week. We'll let you know. But as I said, hopefully you all enjoyed it. For anyone that is wanting to know where else you can catch this, I will be uploading the VOD of this onto my YouTube channel immediately afterwards. It'll probably take about an hour or two for it to be up and available in glorious 360 pixels, unless you want to wait a little longer. And then it'll be up in 1080 eventually. Also, I will take the audio from this recording and put it on all of the podcasts areas, which if there is anywhere you would like to listen to Lorebeards as a podcast, or you think it would do well as a podcast, and you want to have Lorebeards added to that, please reach out to me on Twitter. And I'll see what I can do as far as getting it up there. I know a lot of people want us added onto Apple Podcasts, which I am looking into doing this week. So, Nathan, if you've got any final words as we're closing up here.
As usual, it'll be up on my channel whenever YouTube processes it, and when we get back, because we already kind of started planning the next one, didn't we?
Yeah, it won't be that. It'll be sometime next week. Ish. Ish.
Yeah, so we'll come up with, obviously every episode is going to be as different as possible, but still like with the same format and so on. And hopefully you guys are enjoying it, because I think this is pretty fun, honestly.
Yeah, and hopefully we'll have more tricks and tools. I have started doing my best to try and get us some art, and maybe we can get like an opening song and some other shenanigans at some point. We'll see. But thank you all for watching. Thank you all for supporting the podcast, by just listening to it. And of course, if you want to support either of us, you can always check us out on our various live streams. You can find Nathan at the Great Book of Grudges over on YouTube, and also Twitter, which is at tgrudges, if memory serves.
Bing?
Yeah, pretty sure. And you can find me at lsotek on Twitter. Also YouTube, Loremaster of Sotek, and also on Twitch at www.twitch.tv/Loremaster of Sotek. So thank you all so much for watching. I think that's going to be a wrap for us, and we'll catch you guys next time. Thanks for watching, guys. Bye.